Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Relaxing. Tonight we settle into a kind of cold that does not rush. You're standing still, breath soft but visible as winter lowers itself gently over the land. The ground beneath your feet feels firm, almost patient. Somewhere nearby, wood creaks as temperature tightens its grip. You pull something closer around your shoulders and realize very quickly that this is not a night you simply endure. This is a night you prepare for. And here is the cheeky reality check: you probably will not survive this without knowing exactly what you are doing. Cold is honest like that. It does not care how brave you feel, it only responds to knowledge. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. Night has a way of connecting distant places. Now dim the lights and let yourself drift forward. You are not rushing anywhere. Winter has already arrived. It presses down gently, not as a single moment, but as a gradual agreement between sky ground and body. You feel it in your fingers first, then your toes. This is how it always begins, long before conquest, long before maps, long before the word America ever exists. People here already understand this rhythm. A mainstream historical fact often overlooked is that Native American societies occupied nearly every climate zone on the continent, from Arctic tundra to desert plateaus, and all of them developed ways to survive nights that would easily kill the unprepared. This knowledge does not come from books. It comes from watching the moon rise over snow again and again and noticing who wakes up in the morning. You are standing in a world where winter is not an emergency. It is a season with rules. Cold nights are expected, planned for. You feel how different this is from modern panic, where a sudden power outage sends people scrambling. Here, winter presses down slowly, giving warnings weeks and months in advance. Leaves change texture. Animal behavior shifts. Wind smells different. You notice these things because your life depends on noticing them. One quirky tidbit that still surprises researchers is that some indigenous groups timed certain winter preparations based not on temperature, but on the behavior of specific birds whose migration patterns proved more reliable than early snowfall. You watch the sky the way others might watch a clock. As darkness settles, you begin to understand that surviving the coldest nights is not about heroics. It is about stacking small advantages. You do not fight winter, you negotiate with it. The first agreement is location. You're not exposed on a ridge unless you have a reason to be. Cold air sinks, wind scours open spaces. Even without words like thermodynamics, you understand these truths in your bones. You choose places where the land itself offers a slight favour. A dip in the terrain, a stand of trees, a curve in the earth that breaks the wind just enough to matter. Historians still argue whether this environmental awareness should be called science tradition or something else entirely, but standing here with the night deepening the label feels relevant. What matters is that you feel safer where you are now than you would 50 steps away. The cold does not disappear. It becomes quieter, less aggressive. You breathe more easily. As you move closer to shelter, you notice how nothing feels accidental. Every placement has memory behind it. This is one of those moments modern people struggle to imagine. You're not improvising. You're repeating something refined over generations. The night presses down, but it presses down on structures designed to answer back. Winter has been here before, many times. Inside warmth is not dramatic. There is no roaring blaze unless conditions demand it. Instead, heat lingers. It settles low, pooling near the ground where bodies rest. You become aware of how precious fuel is: wood, fat, dried dung. Whatever is used, each source is measured. A quirky but well-documented detail is that some communities intentionally kept fires smaller at night, relying more on insulation and shared body heat, because conserving fuel mattered more than comfort when storms could last days. You learn that warmth does not have to be loud to be effective. You sit or lie down and feel how the cold behaves differently once you stop moving. Muscles cool, joints stiffen slightly. This is where planning shows its value. You are wrapped layered, shielded from direct contact with frozen air. The materials around you are not random, they have texture and smell. Hide smells faintly of smoke and animal oil. Earth smells damp but steady. Wood carries a dry, resinous note. These scents are not just atmosphere, they signal safety. Familiarity calms the body, and a calm body conserves heat better. That is not poetry, that is survival. You notice sound next. Winter nights amplify small noises. A branch snapping far away sounds closer than it is. Wind slipping along shelter edges hums instead of howls. Silence itself feels heavier. You learn to distinguish between threatening sounds and ordinary winter movement. Sleep depends on that distinction. You cannot rest if every sound triggers alarm. Over time, your mind learns which noises belong to the season and which do not. Scholars continue to debate how much psychological conditioning played a role in winter survival. But sitting here, you feel the effect directly. Fear wastes energy. Calm preserves it. Stories told quietly in the evening are not just entertainment. They slow breathing. They lengthen attention. They ease the transition into sleep. Cold nights demand rest that is efficient, not luxurious. You shift slightly, careful not to disturb the shared warmth around you. Bodies are arranged with intention. Elders, children. Those most vulnerable are placed where heat lingers longest. This is not sentiment, it is logistics shaped by care. Another mainstream historical observation is that communal sleeping arrangements were common across many native societies, not only for social reasons, but because clustered bodies retained warmth far better than isolated ones. You feel the difference immediately. Outside, the night deepens. Stars sharpen. The world feels distant, held at arm's length by cold. Inside, time slows. You drift closer to sleep, aware that tomorrow will bring more preparation, more movement, more quiet labour to stay ahead of the season. But for now, you are not fighting winter, you're coexisting with it. The cold presses down, yes, but it presses down on knowledge that has already learned how to hold. And as your breathing evens out, you begin to understand that surviving the coldest nights of winter is not a single skill. It is a way of seeing the world that refuses to rush, that listens carefully, and that never assumes comfort is guaranteed. It is a long conversation with the land spoken softly, night after night. The cold you feel tonight is not new. It does not belong to this moment alone. It has been shaping lives here for thousands of winters, long before unfamiliar ships ever touched distant shores. You sense this as you wake again in the darkness, your body already remembering what to do. There is no confusion, no panic. Winter is not an interruption of life. It is a condition of it. You step outside briefly, just enough to feel the air against your face. Cold tightens your skin, sharp but clean. This land has always demanded respect. A widely accepted historical reality is that indigenous peoples across North America adapted to their environments over at least 15,000 years, possibly longer, developing seasonal strategies that allowed them to thrive in places Europeans later described as uninhabitable. You're living inside that adaptation now. It does not feel dramatic, it feels ordinary. Before conquest, before borders and fences, winter already dictated schedules. You do not decide when winter begins, you observe it. The angle of sunlight shifts, days shorten. Snow does not need to fall yet for preparations to intensify. You already know what is coming. This foresight is one of the quiet strengths of societies deeply tied to place. You're not reacting to cold, you're anticipating it. A quirky detail that often surprises people is that some native communities began winter preparations based on changes in sound. The way leaves rustled, the echo of footsteps on frozen ground. even the quality of silence at dusk. These sensory cues mattered as much as temperature. You notice how sound carries farther now. The world feels hollowed out. Winter is approaching its deepest phase. You return to shelter, aware of how different this feels from modern homes that pretend winter does not exist. There is no insulation separating you from the season completely. Instead, there is cooperation. Materials slow the cold. They do not erase it. This teaches patience. It teaches humility. You learn early that pretending the cold is gone leads to mistakes. Historians still debate whether indigenous winter knowledge should be understood as localized adaptation or as part of the broader continental patterns. But from where you sit, that argument feels distant. What matters is that every group, every region answered the same question differently. How do you make it through the longest nights without losing people? You think of those who lived far north, where winter nights stretch endlessly. There, darkness itself becomes a presence. Further south, winter brings different challenges. Wind across open plains, sudden freezes after rain. In forests, snow piles silently muting movement. Each environment teaches different lessons. The cold is never abstract. It has texture, weight, sound. One mainstream historical fact worth sitting with is that Native American winter survival strategies were not static. They changed over time. Trade routes spread ideas, migration altered habits, climate shifts forced adjustments. This flexibility kept communities alive. You feel that mindset now. Nothing here is rigid. Everything is responsive. You move closer to the fire, which has been banked low. Flames flicker lazily. More suggestion than spectacle. Fire here is not entertainment. It is a companion. It is fed, carefully allowed to rest when possible. A small but telling detail found in oral histories is that children were often taught to tend fires long before they were trusted with hunting tools. Knowing how to keep warmth steady mattered as much as knowing how to bring food home. The cold seeps inward if you let it. Fingers stiffen, breath shallows, but you are not letting it. Your posture shifts to conserve heat. You tuck hands instinctively. These are learned responses passed down through watching and imitation rather than instruction manuals. You were not told how to do this in words. You absorbed it. Outside winter, life continues. Animals move differently now. Some disappear entirely, others grow bold, driven by hunger. You're aware of them, but not afraid. You understand their patterns too. This knowledge shapes where you rest, how you listen at night. Sleep is lighter in winter, but not restless. You trust your surroundings. Scholars continue to discuss how much pre-contact native populations understood long-term climate cycles, but standing here you feel how deeply weather is woven into decision-making. You do not need global models. You need memory. Your grandparents remembered harsher winters. They remembered mistakes. Those memories live in habits now. As night deepens, you feel how the cold sharpens thought. There is less excess. Movements become deliberate. Conversations shorten. Energy is conserved quietly. You notice how this changes relationships. People rely on each other more. Sharing heat means sharing space. There is little room for isolation. Winter pushes everyone closer physically and socially. A lesser known but fascinating detail is that some groups adjusted sleeping positions seasonally, turning bodies toward or away from entrances based on prevailing winter winds. You shift without thinking, aligning yourself with warmth. Even sleep has strategy embedded in it. You lie, still listening. The fire pops softly. Someone nearby breathes in a slow, steady rhythm. Outside wind brushes past the shelter without forcing its way in. This is success. Not triumph, not domination, but balance. You're not conquering winter. You're enduring it with care. Cold nights like this are teachers. They reveal weak planning quickly. They reward attentiveness. Over generations, this creates cultures that value observation over assumption. You feel that value settling into you now as naturally as sleep. The world beyond this shelter may one day misunderstand these practices. Some will see simplicity where there is refinement. Others will dismiss comfort that does not look familiar. But tonight, none of that matters. What matters is that you are warm enough, that the fire will last. That morning will come. As your eyes close again, you carry the quiet truth that winter did not arrive suddenly. It was expected, it will be met, and it will be met again night after night with the same steady knowledge that has always been here. You begin to notice that winter survival does not actually start at night. It starts earlier, long before darkness settles in with how you read the land during the day. As morning light spreads thin and pale across the ground, you feel the cold lingering even after the sun appears. This is the kind of cold that does not retreat politely. It waits. You understand now that knowing where you stand matters just as much as what you build or wear. You walk slowly, paying attention to small details. The ground feels different in shaded areas, harder, less forgiving. Low spots hold frost longer. Wind slides through open spaces and skips over others entirely. You're learning, or rather remembering, how to read these signals. A well-established historical fact is that many Native American groups chose winter camp locations with extraordinary precision, favouring natural windbreak, southern exposures and proximity to fuel and water that would not freeze solid. These choices were not guesses. They were lessons learned through long experience. You pause near a stand of trees and feel the difference immediately. The air is quieter here. Snow gathers differently. Branches interrupt the wind, breaking it into softer currents. This place feels calmer, safer. You sense how the land itself participates in your survival. You're not alone against winter. You're collaborating with terrain. A quirky but revealing detail passed down in some oral traditions is that elders taught children to test winter ground with their feet, not their eyes. A place that looks sheltered might still channel cold air at ankle level. You shuffle forward, feeling subtle drafts brush your legs. That awareness stays with you. Cold creeps upward if you let it. Historians still argue whether this kind of environmental literacy should be considered a formal system of knowledge or an intuitive practice shaped by culture, but standing here the distinction feels artificial. You know what you know because your life depends on it. Labels come later. As you move, you notice animal tracks etched into thin snow. They tell stories too. Where animals choose to pass or avoid reveals shelter, danger and hidden paths. You're not copying them blindly, but you respect their instincts. Another mainstream observation is that indigenous winter strategies often incorporated close attention to animal behavior, not only for hunting, but for understanding weather patterns and terrain changes. Animals are early warning systems with legs. You crouch and scoop a bit of snow into your hand. It squeaks faintly as you compress it. That sound tells you how cold it is. Dry snow speaks differently than wet snow. Your fingers sting, then adjust. You release the snow and rub your hands together, slowly conserving warmth. This kind of attention feels meditative. Winter sharpens focus. There is little room for distraction. Choosing where to sleep tonight is not about comfort in the modern sense. It is about minimizing loss, heat loss, energy loss, moisture loss. You avoid places where meltwater might seep in later. You think ahead to sudden thaws followed by freezes. The land has habits and you try to learn them. Scholars continue to debate how far ahead indigenous planning extended, whether it accounted for extreme outliers or relied on flexible response. But either way, the result is resilience. You return toward the shelter aware that every step reinforces familiarity with your surroundings. This knowledge accumulates quietly. No single observation matters on its own. Together they create a mental map that guides you even in darkness. You could walk this ground at night and know where the wind will bite hardest. That confidence lowers anxiety. Anxiety wastes warmth. Inside you notice how the shelter aligns with the land you just studied. It is not randomly placed. The entrance faces away from prevailing winter winds. The structure sits slightly elevated to avoid pooling moisture. These decisions feel invisible until you imagine not making them. A small mistake here could mean waking up soaked cold and dangerously exposed. A lesser-known but fascinating detail is that some groups oriented winter shelters to capture early morning sun, deliberately allowing natural warmth to help bodies recover after cold nights. You imagine how sunlight will creep in later, touching faces and hands, signaling that another night has been successfully endured. You settle in, feeling the day's observations settle into your body as well. This is not intellectual knowledge. It is muscle memory forming. You know where to sit to avoid drafts. You know which surfaces steal heat faster. You know how close to others is close enough without disturbing sleep. Winter teaches these lessons quickly. Outside wind picks up, briefly testing the shelter. It slides around rather than through. You listen satisfied. The land did its part, you did yours. This cooperation feels ancient. It hums beneath everything. Historians still question how much of this knowledge was shared across regions versus developed independently, but you feel the answer might be both. Similar problems produce similar solutions. Different landscapes demand different refinements. The cold does not care how you learned, only that you learned well. As you lie down, you reflect on how modern people often experience winter as an inconvenience, something to escape from indoors. Here, winter is an instructor. It teaches you to slow down, to observe before acting, to choose carefully. Those lessons extend beyond cold nights. Sleep comes gradually. You feel your breathing deepen as your body trusts its surroundings. The land outside remains cold, vast, indifferent. Inside there is warmth enough. Not excess, but balance. Tomorrow you will read the land again. It will still be speaking, and you will still be listening. As the night stretches on, you begin to feel how shelter itself becomes a second skin. Not something separate from you, but something that works with your body to slow the steady leak of warmth into the dark. You shift slightly and sense the walls nearby close enough to matter. They do not loom, they cradle. Winter presses from the outside, but it does not rush in. You notice how the structure around you seems alive in small ways. Wood contracts quietly. Hide coverings tighten as cold deepens. Earth packed into walls holds the day's faint warmth longer than you expect. Evidence from archaeological remains shows that many Native American winter shelters were deliberately low to the ground, reducing the volume of air that needed warming and limiting exposure to wind. This is not claustrophobia. It is efficiency shaped by long nights. Your breath fogs briefly, then fades. That tells you the shelter is doing its job. Heat lingers where it is needed most, near the floor, around resting bodies. You learn early that standing too long in winter wastes energy. Life lowers itself closer to the ground when the cold intensifies. Sitting, lying down, remaining still, these are not signs of laziness. They are survival strategies. The materials around you are chosen with care. Bark panels overlap like scales. Hides are stretched just enough to block drafts without tearing as temperatures shift. In some regions, woven mats add an extra layer, trapping pockets of still air. One quietly surprising practice uncovered through oral histories is that damaged shelter coverings were often repaired immediately, even during storms, because a small gap could undo hours of careful heat conservation. Maintenance is not optional in winter. It is constant. You run your fingers along a surface and feel its texture. Rough in places, smooth in others. Every mark tells a story of use, of hands pressing, adjusting, refining. Researchers have long noted that native shelters were rarely static designs. They evolved, adjusted season by season. A structure that worked in early winter might be modified as cold deepened. Extra layers added, entrances narrowed, smoke holes adjusted. Flexibility keeps you alive when conditions refuse to stay predictable. There is no single blueprint here. Plains lodges differ from woodland homes. Desert winter shelters respond to cold nights and warm days differently than northern dwellings that never fully thaw. The The question of how much knowledge travelled between regions remains open, but similar solutions appear again and again, shaped by shared challenges rather than direct contact. You feel connected to people far away who never met you simply because the cold taught you the same lessons. Inside, the air feels dense but breathable. Smoke clings lightly near the ceiling, guided out through a small opening that balances ventilation and warmth. You're aware of it, but it doesn't sting your eyes. Managing air becomes as important as managing heat. Too sealed and breathing suffers. Too open and warmth escapes. Interpretations differ on how precisely ancient builders understood airflow, but the results suggest careful experimentation rather than guesswork. You listen to the shelter responding to the wind outside, a low hum, a gentle rattle, not alarming, reassuring. The sounds tell you the structure is holding. Sound becomes a diagnostic tool. If the pitch changes suddenly, something has shifted. You remain alert even as sleep pulls at you. Winter sleep is lighter but not restless. It hovers near awareness. A detail often overlooked in popular imagination is how entrances are treated. They're rarely straight passages. Instead, they angle, dip or curve, forcing cold air to lose momentum before reaching the interior. You feel this as you pass through, noticing how the chill stays behind you rather than following. This design choice, repeated across cultures, shows a deep understanding of how cold moves. You do not need equations. You need experience. You settle. Again pulling coverings closer. Hide smells faintly of smoke and fat, a comforting scent now associated with safety. These smells anchor you. They tell your body that you are where you should be. Psychological comfort matters more than modern people often realize. When fear loosens its grip, muscles relax. Relaxed muscles retain heat more effectively. This quiet relationship between mind and body is rarely discussed, but it plays out here every night. There is ongoing discussion among scholars about whether communal shelter living increased disease transmission during winter, but many accounts suggest that careful spacing, ventilation, and seasonal movement helped mitigate these risks. You feel how people position themselves thoughtfully, not piled carelessly but arranged. Elders where warmth gathers, children shielded from drafts, knowledge expressed without instruction. The shelter holds not just heat but time. Stories told here linger in the walls. Repairs made last winter remind you of storms survived. Each scratch, each patch is a memory of adaptation. This continuity matters. You're not inventing solutions alone in the dark. You're inheriting them. Outside, the cold deepens again. The stars feel sharper, more distant. Inside, the temperature drops slightly, then stabilizes. The shelter adjusts. You adjust with it. This partnership between body structure and environment feels intimate. It blurs the line between nature and human effort. As sleep finally settles over you, you realize that shelter is not about separation from the world. It is about negotiation, letting in what sustains you, keeping out what harms you. Winter teaches this lesson gently, night after night, until it becomes instinct. You breathe slowly. The shelter breathes with you. Cold remains, outside present but patient. Inside there is enough warmth to carry you through the dark and enough knowledge to trust that morning will come. You sink closer to the ground tonight, and in doing so you begin to understand why Earth itself becomes part of the shelter. Not just beneath you, but around you, holding you. The cold above feels sharper than the cold below. The soil does not rush heat away the way air does. It keeps secrets. It keeps temperature steady. You feel that steadiness through your back and shoulders as you settle in. Across many regions, people learned that going downward was often safer than building upward. Archaeological traces confirm that earth lodges, semi-underground homes and dugout shelters were widely used during harsh winters, particularly on the plains and in river-rich regions. These structures took advantage of the insulating properties of soil, which remains far warmer than winter air once you move just a short distance below the surface. You feel that difference immediately. The cold stops shouting, it starts whispering. The walls around you are thick-packed, layered with care. Earth mixed with grasses, wood, sometimes stone. Each layer slows the movement of cold. You run your hand along the wall and feel firmness beneath a faint softness. This is not dirt left untouched. It is shaped, pressed, maintained. One detail that often surprises people is that these earth walls were routinely repaired throughout winter, not just in warmer months. Cracks mattered, even small ones. Cold finds patience rewarding. You notice how sound behaves here. Outside noises feel distant, dulled by layers of soil. Wind loses its edge. Snow falling above becomes a muted hush instead of a sharp patter. This quiet helps sleep arrive more easily. Calm is not a luxury in winter. It is protection. When the mind settles, the body wastes less energy. The entrance sits slightly above where you rest. Cold air sinks, warm air rises. This simple observation shapes the entire structure. You feel warmth pooling low around bodies while colder air lingers nearer the doorway. No one explained this to you in theory. You learned it by feeling where the cold settles. Generations before you noticed the same thing. There is some disagreement among researchers about how standardized Earth Lodge designs were across different cultures, but the repeated appearance of similar features suggests shared solutions, shaped by environment rather than coincidence. Rounded interiors, central hearths, thick earthen roofs supported by timber frames. You look up and trust what you see. The ceiling holds, it always has. A quietly remarkable habit recorded in several traditions is the practice of keeping interior earth surfaces slightly damp during construction, so they would harden as they dried in cold weather. This created walls that resisted crumbling and sealed drafts more effectively. You brush your fingers against the surface and feel its strength. Winter demands foresight even from mud. The earth smells different than the wood or hide. It carries a deep mineral scent, grounded, familiar. This smell signals safety. It tells your body you're surrounded by something that does not change quickly. In a season defined by extremes, that stability matters. You breathe deeper here. Fire behaves differently in an earth shelter. Heat spreads slowly, evenly. Smoke lingers longer and less carefully managed. You are aware of the balance required. Vent openings are adjusted constantly. Too open and warmth escapes. Too closed and air grows heavy. Evidence suggests that many communities developed highly refined techniques for managing airflow in these spaces even if they never describe them formally. You feel the result rather than the process. You shift position slightly, careful not to disturb the packed floor. Bedding rests atop layers of grasses, furs, sometimes woven mats. These layers do more than soften the ground. They separate you from cold soil directly beneath. Another well-supported observation is that insulation beneath the body matters as much as covering above it. Heat sinks downward otherwise. You tuck your feet into a warmer pocket and feel relief spread slowly. There is conversation here, but it is quiet. Voices are low. Sound travels strangely in rounded spaces. It echoes softly, encouraging slower speech. Stories told in earth lodges tend to stretch, unfolding gently. This pacing helps the night pass without anxiety. Time feels thicker underground, less urgent. Some scholars question whether living partially underground affected health long-term, but others point out that seasonal use and constant maintenance likely reduced risks. You sense how these spaces are not permanent prisons, they are winter solutions. When spring returns, life rises back toward the surface. Flexibility remains key. You listen to the roof above you. Snow accumulates quietly, adding another insulating layer. The earth welcomes it. Weight presses down evenly. The structure responds without complaint. This cooperation between shelter and season feels intentional. Nothing here is fighting gravity or cold. Everything works with them. You feel protected but not sealed away. The outside world still exists. You can sense it. The difference is that it no longer dominates your attention. Cold becomes background rather than threat. That shift allows sleep to deepen. As the night moves forward, you become aware of how these earth shelters anchor memory. Families return to the same locations year after year. Rapiers recall past winters. Stories recall storms survived. This continuity strengthens confidence. You're not improvising, you're continuing. The earth beneath you holds warmth from earlier days, from the slow turning of seasons. It gives that warmth back reluctantly, steadily. You match its pace. Your breathing slows, muscles loosen, the cold outside remains sharp, but it cannot reach you fully here. You close your eyes, knowing that the ground itself is part of your defense. Not conquered, not exploited, simply understood. Winter presses on, but the earth presses back just enough, and for tonight that is enough. As the fire settles into a low, steady glow, your attention drifts to the materials closest to you. Wood, bark, bone, things that once lived now working quietly to keep you alive through the night. You touch a wooden support post and feel how dry it is, how carefully chosen. Not every tree earns a place here. Some crack in cold, others warp. Over generations, people learned which woods held their strength when temperatures plunged. It's firmly supported by archaeological findings that many native communities selected specific tree species for winter construction because of how they behaved in freezing condition. Cedar resists rot and insects. Spruce bends before it breaks. Cottonwood insulates surprisingly well when layered thickly. These choices were not aesthetic, they were practical decisions shaped by cold nights that punished mistakes. Bark plays its own role. Stripped carefully in warm seasons and stored, it becomes a shield against wind and moisture. You run your fingers along a bark panel and feel its layered toughness. It flexes slightly instead of cracking. This flexibility matters when temperatures swing wildly. One detail that feels almost unexpected is that bark was often layered, with the smooth side facing inward, reducing drafts and making interior surfaces gentler to touch. Comfort and survival overlap more than people assume. Bone appears in places you might not notice at first: pegs, fasteners, tools used to shape other materials. In some regions, large bones help reinforce roof structures or anchor hides against wind. Researchers have observed that bone, unlike brittle stone, retains strength in extreme cold without becoming dangerously sharp when fractured. You see now how nothing was wasted. Every part of an animal carried potential. The smell of these materials blends together. Wood smoke, resin, faint traces of animal fat. This scent signals warmth and enclosure. It is deeply familiar. Modern people often underestimate how much smell influences calm. Here, scent reassures you that everything is as it should be. Your body relaxes into that knowledge. The shelter creaks softly as temperature drops again. Wood contracts. Joints tighten. The sounds are expected. They tell you the structure is adjusting rather than failing. You listen without alarm. This attentiveness is learned. New sounds would wake you. Familiar ones let you sleep. There is no single design governing how these materials come together. In forests, wood dominates. On the plains, timber frames combine with hides and grasses. In coastal regions, driftwood and whalebone sometimes appear. Debate continues around how much these variations were driven by environment versus cultural preference, but standing here, the answer feels simple. You use what the land gives you, and you learn how it behaves. You notice how seams are treated, overlaps instead of gaps, lashings tightened and retightened. Rawhide shrinks slightly as it dries and cold-pulling joints closer together. This effect was well known. A seemingly loose binding in autumn becomes perfectly snug by winter. This is not luck. It is planning that accounts for cold itself as a tool. A lesser-known practice involved warming wooden components slightly during assembly, so they would contract later, sealing joints more tightly as temperatures dropped. You feel the results rather than thinking about the process. Drafts are minimal. The interior air remains still. Still air holds heat. Bone tools hang nearby is smooth from use. Their surfaces reflect firelight softly. They remind you that shelter building was never separate from hunting or food gathering. These activities flowed into one another. The animal that fed you also helped house you. This continuity shaped a worldview where survival was cyclical rather than segmented. Some scholars point out that reliance on organic materials required constant maintenance, but that maintenance itself reinforced knowledge transfer. Children learned by watching repairs. They learned how bark should sound when tapped, how wood should smell when split. Winter nights provided the time for these lessons told quietly while hands worked. You adjust your position and feel the floor beneath you. Wooden slats, packed earth, layers of plant material. Each layer slows heat loss. Evidence suggests that even thin wooden platforms raised above ground made a noticeable difference in winter comfort. Elevation of just a few inches mattered. You feel less cold creeping upward now. Outside wind picks up briefly. It slides over bark panels and along curved surfaces instead of forcing its way in. This shape is intentional. Flat walls catch wind. Rounded forms let it pass. This understanding appears across many regions, even among groups with no direct contact. The cold teaches similar lessons everywhere. There is ongoing discussion among researchers about whether these building traditions should be classified as architecture in the modern sense. But lying here, the question feels misplaced. This is architecture of necessity, of care, of observation refined by long nights like this one. You trace a crack in a wooden beam with your eyes and remember it was patched last winter. Someone noticed it early. Someone took the time to fix it before it mattered. That attention saved warmth tonight. Survival often depends on people who notice small things. As the fire dims further, the materials around you continue working. Wood holds shape. Bark resists moisture. Bone stays strong. None of it draws attention to itself. That is the point. Good shelter disappears into the background once it works. Your breathing slows. Muscles loosen. You trust the structure not because it looks impressive, but because it has proven itself. Over and over. Winter after winter. The cold outside remains sharp, but here it is filtered through layers of living memory. As sleep pulls you under, you sense how deeply this knowledge runs. It is not written. It is built, tied, smoothed by hands long gone. Tonight those hands still protect you quietly through wood, bark and bone. By now you understand that staying alive through winter is not always about staying put. Some nights safety comes from knowing when to leave. You feel this truth as you wake before dawn, sensing a shift in the air that tells you the cold is changing its behaviour. Wind direction alters slightly. Snow feels sharper underfoot. The land is speaking again, and this time it is suggesting movement. You gather what you need without hurry. Nothing here is heavy without reason. Mobility has shaped every choice. Shelter that can be taken down. Tools that serve more than one purpose. Clothing that allows movement without shedding warmth. Long-standing patterns in settlement sites show that many Native American groups did not rely on permanent winter homes alone, but instead shifted camps seasonally to match weather resources and terrain. You're stepping into that rhythm now. Moving in winter is not impulsive. It is calculated. You do not travel far unless you must. Each step costs energy. Each mile demands fuel, but staying in the wrong place can cost more. Flooded ground freezing solid. Wind patterns shifting unexpectedly, game moving elsewhere. You weigh these factors quietly, drawing on memory rather than maps. You pack slowly, keeping items close to your body to prevent stiffening. Cold makes everything less forgiving. Leather hardens, wood grows brittle. You know how to handle them anyway. One detail that rarely makes it into textbooks is that winter travel often happened during the warmest part of the day, even if that warmth barely registered by modern standards. A few degrees mattered. You time your movement accordingly. As you step out, the cold greets you directly again. It feels different than when you last stood here. More alert. You pull your coverings tighter and begin walking not rushing but not lingering either. Movement generates heat, but too much movement leads to sweat, and sweat becomes dangerous when you stop. You regulate your pace carefully. Snow beneath you tells its own story, hard packed in places, soft drifts in others. You choose your path based on feel as much as sight. Evidence from worn trails and travel routes suggests that indigenous winter movement favoured consistency over speed, using familiar paths that reduced risk, even if they were not the shortest distance. Safety mattered more than efficiency. You notice how your shelter materials travel with you. Poles rest against your shoulder. Bundles hang evenly. Nothing swings wildly. Balance conserves energy. This is why designs favour portability. Tippy frames, skin tents, mat-covered structures. They come apart and come together without fuss. You're not building from scratch each time. You're reassembling something already known. There remains discussion among scholars about how often winter camps shifted versus staying fixed, but the archaeological record suggests flexibility rather than rigid rules. Some winters demanded stillness, others demanded movement. The skill lay in recognizing which kind you were facing. Tonight the land has answered that question for you. As you walk, you listen. Sound behaves differently when you move. Your own breathing becomes louder in your ears. Snow crunches or squeaks depending on temperature. Trees groan softly. You learn to distinguish your own noise from everything else. Predators move differently. Wind moves differently. This awareness keeps you calm. A quietly surprising practice involved travelling with minimal fire use during short winter relocations, relying instead on layered clothing and movement to maintain warmth. Fire leaves signs. It costs time. When moving quickly between known shelters, you save it. You feel confident doing this because you trust what you're wearing and how your body responds. You reach a new location as the light begins to change. The sun does not rise so much as it fades the darkness slightly. You recognize this place. It has served you before. Trees break the wind. Snow lies evenly, the ground slopes just enough to shed meltwater later. Familiarity brings relief. Setting up shelter again feels almost automatic. Hands move without discussion. Poles slot into place. Coverings stretch smoothly. The structure rises quickly even in the cold. This speed matters. Exposure drains warmth fast when you stop moving. Patterns across winter camps show repeated use of the same locations year after year, reinforcing efficiency through familiarity. You feel that efficiency now. Inside, warmth begins to build again, modest but sufficient. You sit close to the ground, letting your body adjust. Movement has flushed cold from your limbs, but rest must follow carefully. Too abrupt and chill returns. You manage the transition slowly. There is an unresolved question about how often long-distance winter travel occurred versus short relocations, but oral traditions tend to emphasize caution over bravado. Winter is not the season for proving endurance. It is the season for staying alive. You take that lesson seriously. You share space again. Bodies settle into familiar arrangements. Heat collects. The fire is lit sparingly. Outside, the wind tests the new shelter briefly, then moves on. You listen and smile faintly. The land agrees with your choice. As the night deepens once more, you reflect on how movement itself becomes a form of insulation. Not constant motion, but timely motion. Knowing when to shift, when to stay, when to let the land reset the terms. This flexibility defines winter survival more than any single tool or structure. Modern life often treats movement as inconvenience. Here it is freedom, the ability to respond rather than endure passively. That mindset carries through everything. You're not trapped by winter, you're in conversation with it. Sleep arrives again, eased by the satisfaction of having listened well. Tomorrow may bring stillness or a movement again. Either way, you are ready. The cold will keep changing, so will you. Snow no longer feels like an enemy once you stop treating it that way. Tonight, as the ground disappears beneath a clean white layer, you notice how the world grows quieter, softer, almost padded. Your steps sink slightly, then hold. Snow receives you, it does not reject you. You brush some from your sleeve and feel how dry it is, how light. This is not just cold made visible, this is material. People who live through long winters learn this early. Snow insulates, it reshapes sound, it hides movement and reveals it at the same time. Findings from winter camps across the continent show that snow was often incorporated directly into shelter systems banked along walls or packed carefully to seal drafts. You look at the edges of your shelter now and see where snow has been nudged into place, closing tiny gaps without adding weight. The difference is immediate. Wind loses interest. You scoop a handful and let it fall slowly. Dry snow does not melt quickly, it traps air. That trapped air holds warmth better than bare ground. You remember being taught not to clear snow away thoughtlessly. Clearing exposes frozen earth that steals heat faster. Leaving snow in place or shaping it gently keeps the ground calmer. This knowledge does not come from theory, it comes from nights when mistakes were felt in the bones. There is a detail that feels almost counterintuitive at first. Snow can be used to keep things from freezing solid. Water containers buried beneath snow stay liquid longer than those left exposed. You press your hand into a drift and feel how the temperature barely changes as you go deeper. The surface bites. Below it steadies. This trick saves time, fuel, and frustration during winter mornings. You do not fight ice if you can persuade it not to form. You listen as snow continues to fall lightly. Each flake absorbs sound. The world seems to inhale. This quiet has a purpose. Predators hear less. You hear more. Your breathing slows without effort. Calm returns. Researchers studying winter camps have noted that snowfall often coincided with longer rest periods, as travel became riskier and sound cues diminished. You feel that instinct guiding you now. Tonight is for staying close. Snow also marks paths. Tracks appear clearly. Your own footprints tell you how long ago you passed through. Animal signs sharpen. You can read movement in a way summer never allows. This turns snow into a kind of record keeper. You notice where animals approach shelter and where they avoid it. That information matters. It shapes how alert you remain. You remember being shown how to test snow with sound. You can press it gently, it squeaks. That tells you it is very cold and dry. Wet snow behaves differently. It packs easily, it melts faster. Each kind demands a different response. Some snow is good for sealing walls, some is better left alone. You adjust without thinking too hard about it. The knowledge lives in your hands now. There is still uncertainty among experts about how widespread the use of snow shelters was outside of the far north, but scattered evidence and oral accounts suggest that even groups who did not build full snow houses still relied on snow shaping for protection. Windbreaks, low walls, drifter management. You see these traces around you. Subtle curves, cleared paths, snow pushed just enough to matter. You sit near the shelter wall and feel how the temperature holds steady. Snow outside thickens the barrier. Inside, warmth feels contained rather than leaking away. Fire does not need to work as hard. Fuel lasts longer. This efficiency adds up over weeks of winter. Survival often depends on these quiet savings rather than dramatic acts. A lesser-known practice involved using snow to cool certain foods without freezing them completely, creating a stable storage environment. You picture small bundles tucked into shaded drifts protected from animals and temperature swings. Snow becomes pantry and refrigerator at once. Winter provides its own tools if you pay attention. You stand briefly and step outside again. Snow reflects light, even starlight. The night feels brighter than before. This helps orientation. It also changes how time feels. Darkness is less absolute. You do not rush back inside. You take a moment to appreciate how the land has softened its edges. The way snow interacts with wind matters too. Drifts form predictably around obstacles. You watch where snow piles against trees and shelter walls. Those patterns reveal airflow. Tomorrow, if the wind shifts, the snow will tell you first. You tuck that information away. Winter always leaves notes if you know how to read them. There is ongoing discussion about whether snow management was taught formally or absorbed through observation, but the result is the same. Children learn by doing. By watching elders shape drifts, clear paths and bank walls. Mistakes are corrected gently. Snow is forgiving compared to ice. It allows learning without immediate danger. You brush snow from your hair and step back inside. The shelter feels warmer now than it did an hour ago, even though the fire has not changed. That warmth comes from stillness, from sealed gaps, from snow doing its quiet work outside. You sit and feel gratitude towards something many people curse. As the night deepens, snowfall slows. The world settles into a deeper hush. You lie down again, aware that the snow above and around you is now part of your protection. It blocks wind, it muffles sound, it stabilizes temperature. It turns the shelter into something stronger without adding effort. Modern life often treats snow as an obstacle to be cleared as fast as possible. Here, clearing too much would be foolish. You work with what falls, you accept it, you shape it. This mindset keeps you alive. Your breathing evens out again. The snow continues to rest against the shelter, patient and light. Outside, cold remains sharp, but it feels held back. Inside, you are warm enough. That is the goal, not luxury, not excess, just enough. Sleep comes easily now, carried on the quiet snow brings with it. The world feels wrapped, padded, kind in its own stern way. Snow is no longer something happening to you, it is something happening with you. Fire tonight is not a spectacle. It is a presence, low controlled, almost shy. You sit close enough to feel its breath, far enough to avoid wasting what it offers. In winter, fire is not about brightness. It is about restraint. You have learned that a roaring flame eats fuel faster than it gives comfort. What you want is steadiness. You feed the fire carefully, choosing pieces that burn slow and even. Dense wood, dried material saved specifically for nights like this. Across many regions, fire pits from winter dwellings show consistent signs of long, low-temperature burns, rather than intense heat. That pattern tells a quiet story. People were not trying to overwhelm the cold, they were pacing themselves against it. You watch how the fire behaves. Flames curl lazily, hugging the fuel instead of leaping upward. Heat spreads outward, not upward. This matters. Warmth near the ground keeps bodies comfortable. Heat lost to the ceiling helps no one. You remember being taught to read fire the way others read faces. Its mood tells you whether it is being treated well. Smoke drifts slowly upward, guided towards an opening that has been adjusted again and again. You notice how little smoke lingers near your eyes. That balance took practice. There is still no universal agreement on how precisely airflow was calculated in ancient shelters, but the results speak clearly. Fires burned indoors without suffocating the people they warmed. Trial, error, and memory refined the process. A detail that surprises many people is how often fires were allowed to die down almost completely during the deepest part of the night. Instead of feeding flames constantly, people relied on insulation, shared warmth, and embers banked beneath ash. You reach forward and stir gently. The embers glow softly, ready to respond when needed. Fuel saved now may mean warmth tomorrow. You notice how your body responds to fire. Face warms first, hands loosen, toes follow slowly. Heat arrives in waves. You do not chase it. Chasing warmth leads to sweat. Sweat turns dangerous the moment you stop moving. You let heat come to you at its own pace. There is a subtle rhythm to tending fire. Add fuel. Wait. Observe. Adjust. This rhythm calms the mind. It slows breathing. It creates a sense of control in a season that often feels unpredictable. Some researchers have suggested that fire tending played a psychological role in winter survival, not just a physical one. Sitting here, you feel that truth. Fire gives you something to listen to. The sounds are gentle, a pop, a sigh, a faint crackle. You know which sounds matter and which do not. Sudden sharp cracks mean moisture trapped in wood. A steady low murmur means all is well. You lean back slightly, trusting the fire to do its part without constant supervision. Firelight changes how the shelter feels. Shadows soften, edges blur, the world shrinks to a manageable size. This matters in winter when vastness can overwhelm. You're not meant to hold the whole season in your mind at once. You are meant to hold this moment, this warmth, this night. You remember being told never to burn more than necessary. Fuel is work stored in physical form, cutting it, carrying it, drying it. Each piece represents effort already spent. Burning it carelessly disrespects that effort. This attitude shapes behavior more effectively than rules. You respect the fire because you respect the labor behind it. There remains debate about how often different fuels were mixed in winter fires, but evidence suggests flexibility: wood where trees were abundant, dried grasses or dung where they were not, animal fat added sparingly for quick heat. You notice how the fire smells slightly different tonight, richer. Someone added something dense. It burns slower, better. You stretch your hands toward the warmth, then pull them back again. Prolonged exposure dries skin too much. Everything has a cost. Winter teaches balance relentlessly. Too much heat is as problematic as too little. Comfort lies in the narrow space between extremes. As the night deepens, the fire becomes quieter. Embers glow steadily beneath ash. You add one small piece and watch how the glow brightens without flaring. This is skill refined over years. Fire responds to attention. Neglect it and it fails you. Smother it with fuel and it turns wasteful. There is something intimate about fire in winter. It gathers people without demanding conversation. You sit together close but not crowded. The warmth belongs to everyone equally. This shared reliance strengthens bonds. Winter strips away distractions. Fire becomes a focal point for patience. You lie down again, positioned so warmth reaches you without stealing sleep. The fire will not go out completely. It will hold through the night, breathing slowly under ash. That knowledge allows your body to rest fully. Outside, cold tightens again. Inside, the fire answers quietly, not with drama, but with persistence. That is enough. Winter does not require brilliance. It requires consistency. Your eyes close. The fire remains. Embers pulse softly like a slow heartbeat. Tomorrow it will be stirred again. For now, it keeps watch while you sleep. Night settles again, and this time your awareness turns inward toward how bodies arrange themselves when warmth becomes something shared rather than owned. You lie down carefully, not just choosing a place but choosing a relationship to everyone else in the shelter. Distance matters. So does closeness. Too far apart and cold sneaks in between. Too close and rest becomes shallow. Over many winters, people learned where that balance lives. You notice how bodies naturally curve toward one another, forming a loose circle or gentle line. Heat gathers in the middle. Extremities are tucked inward. This is not something discussed aloud. It happens the way breathing happens, quietly, automatically. The ground beneath you feels firmer than in summer, but the layers between you and it soften the contact. Bedding is arranged with intention, not comfort alone, but protection in mind. The way people sleep changes with the season. In winter, movement slows. Positions are chosen and kept longer. Rolling too often breaks shared warmth. You feel your muscles relax into stillness, conserving energy. Patterns found in winter dwellings suggest that sleeping spaces were carefully organized, often closer together than during warmer months, indicating an understanding that collective warmth reduced individual strain. You feel that truth settle into your back and shoulders. Someone nearby shifts slightly, then stills again. You sense their warmth without touching. The air between you feels thicker, warmer. Still air is precious. You learn to avoid stirring it unnecessarily. Even breathing changes, slower, deeper. Calm breathing wastes less heat. This knowledge is rarely spoken, but it is practiced every night. Children are placed where warmth gathers most easily. Elders too. This is not sentimentality, it is strategy shaped by care. The strongest bodies form a kind of buffer, shielding others from drafts. You feel proud to be part of this arrangement even if no one names it. Everyone contributes simply by being where they are. There is a small habit that stands out if you pay attention. Feet often overlap slightly or rest near another person's legs, not touching directly, but close enough to benefit from shared warmth. Hands are tucked into folds of clothing or beneath bedding layers. Faces remain exposed just enough to breathe freely. This choreography took generations to refine. You benefit from it without thinking. Sleep itself feels different now. It comes in longer stretches but lighter ones. You wake briefly at sounds, then drift again. This is normal. Winter sleep balances rest with awareness. You're never fully unconscious. You're listening even as you dream. This lightness keeps you safe. Some researchers suggest that communal sleeping helped reduce the risk of hypothermia during extreme cold, while others note that it also strengthened social bonds through constant proximity. The truth likely sits somewhere between. You feel both effects at once. Warmth and connection blend together until they are difficult to separate. The smell of bedding becomes noticeable. Faint traces of smoke animal hide dried grasses. These scents anchor you. They tell your body that this place is familiar. Familiarity calms the nervous system. A calm body holds heat more effectively. This connection between comfort and physiology is rarely mentioned, but you feel it working now. You are just slightly careful not to disturb others. Even small movements are deliberate. Someone coughs softly. Someone exhales a long, slow breath. The shelter responds by holding these sounds gently, not letting them bounce too sharply. Everything encourages stillness. You remember being taught to never sleep directly against a cold wall. A small gap matters. Bedding is placed with space between bodies and the shelter edges. That gap prevents heat from bleeding away into earth or wood. You appreciate this detail now as the night deepens and temperatures outside drop further. There is an unresolved question among scholars about how often people slept fully clothed during winter versus partially layered, but experience answers it more clearly than theory. You wear what allows warmth without restricting circulation. Too tight and blood flow suffers. Too loose and heat escapes. You find the balance instinctively. As hours pass, shared warmth accumulates. The shelter feels warmer now than when you first lay down. This is not because the fire has grown stronger. It is because bodies have settled into a rhythm. Heat builds slowly like trust. You feel protected without being confined. Dreams drift in. They are quieter in winter, less vivid. Or perhaps they feel that way because waking life is already subdued. You dream of movement through snow, of firelight flickering against familiar faces, of stories told softly. You wake briefly, then sleep again. Outside, the cold presses harder, but it feels distant. Inside, the arrangement holds. This is not accidental. This is the result of countless small choices made correctly over time. Sleeping together is not just about warmth. It is about survival shaped by cooperation. You realize that in winter, sleep becomes an act of trust. Trust in those around you. Trust in the shelter. Trust in the knowledge passed down. That trust allows rest to deepen even when the world outside feels hostile. As the night edges toward its deepest point, breathing across the shelter synchronizes. Slow, steady. Warm air rises and falls gently. You feel yourself carried along by it. Cold remains present, but it has been negotiated into the background. Morning will come eventually. For now, sleep does its work. Bodies repair, energy restores. Shared warmth holds firm. This is how nights are survived. Not alone, not heroically, but together quietly until the cold loosens its grip once more. When you wake briefly in the night, it is not the cold that brings you back to awareness. It is the feel of what rests against your skin. Clothing here is not decoration or status. It is equipment tuned carefully to winter's demands. You shift your shoulders and feel layers respond, moving with you instead of resisting. That cooperation matters more than thickness alone. Each layer has a job. Closest to your body, something soft absorbs moisture before it becomes a problem. Sweat is dangerous in winter. It steals heat when it cools. Long before anyone talked about insulation in modern terms, people learned this lesson the hard way. Materials that stayed damp were avoided. Those that dried quickly were prized. Over time, preference shaped tradition. You pull the outer layer closer and feel how it blocks drafts without trapping moisture. Fur lies in a particular direction for a reason. When worn correctly, it sheds snow and slows wind. Turn it the wrong way and cold cuts through more easily. This is not guesswork. Surviving repeated winters refine these choices. Physical remains of winter garments show deliberate orientation of hides, confirming that people understood how airflow interacted with animal hair. One small habit stands out if you watch closely. Clothing is loosened slightly before sleep, not removed but adjusted. Tight bindings restrict circulation. Poor circulation means cold fingers and toes. You make the adjustment automatically easing pressure around wrists and ankles. Warmth returns more evenly. Comfort follows. You think about how much labour lives in what you wear. Hides cleaned and softened, fibres twisted patiently, stitching done with bone needles by firelight. This work did not happen quickly. Winter clothing represented weeks of effort stored against the future. Treating it carelessly would be unthinkable. You smooth a seam, gently aware of its value. There is a detail that often surprises modern listeners. Winter clothing was rarely worn the same way indoors and outdoors. Layers shifted depending on activity. When moving, you wore less to prevent overheating. When resting, you added more. This constant adjustment kept your body dry and warm. Evidence from wear patterns on surviving garments suggests frequent donning and removal, not static use. You feel that adaptability in your hands as you rearrange fabric quietly. You notice how seams are placed away from areas that press against the ground during sleep. No one wants cold seeping through compressed stitching. This placement reflects careful thought. Even small details like cuff length matter. Sleeves extend just enough to cover hands when needed, but not so much that they interfere with work. Winter does not forgive clumsiness. There is still no full consensus on how standardized clothing designs were across different regions, but similarities appear wherever cold demanded attention. Layering, adjustable closures, use of fur-hide feathers and plant fibers depending on availability. You feel connected to people far away who solved the same problem differently but with equal care. As you settle again, you tuck your feet deeper into warmth. Footwear in winter is its own science. Soft soles allow circulation and sensation. Stiff footwear restricts both. You wiggle your toes and feel blood return. Snowshoes wait nearby, built to distribute weight and prevent sinking. Even at rest, they remind you that movement tomorrow will depend on preparation tonight. A practice that rarely makes headlines involves airing winter clothing whenever possible, even in cold weather. Moisture trapped in fibres becomes dangerous. You remember spreading garments near firelight during the day, rotating them carefully, drying without scorching. This maintenance kept clothing effective. Neglect would shorten its life quickly. The smell of what you wear feels familiar now. Smoke, animal oil, earth. These scents carry reassurance. They signal that the materials are doing their job. New clothing smells different, less reliable. Trusted garments smell like survival already proven. You feel how layers trap still air close to your body. That air warms and stays put. Movement stirs it. Stillness preserves it. You choose stillness. Sleep returns in shallow waves punctuated by brief awareness. Each time you wake, you adjust a fold or edge. These small corrections keep cold from gaining ground. There is ongoing discussion about how much winter clothing varied by gender or age. But practical needs often overrode symbolism when temperatures dropped. Everyone wore what worked, decorative elements mattered less than function. Survival simplified priorities without stripping meaning from them. You think of children learning these lessons early. How to layer, when to loosen, when to add. Mistakes corrected gently before they became dangerous. Winter education was continuous, woven into daily life rather than taught separately. You benefit from that lineage now. Outside wind picks up, briefly testing every seam and closure. You feel nothing penetrate. The clothing answers quietly. That silence is success. Winter clothing does not announce itself. It disappears once it works. As hours pass, your body temperature stabilizes. You're not hot, you're not cold. You exist in the narrow middle space winter allows. That balance feels earned. You rest in it. When dawn eventually comes, clothing will shift again. Layers removed for movement, adjusted for being. But for now, they hold you gently doing what they were shaped to do. This is technology born from observation, patience, and respect for cold that never pretended to be kind. You drift deeper into sleep knowing that what you wear tonight is not fashion frozen in time. It is knowledge stitched into form, carrying warmth forward through generations, one quiet night at a time. You wake before fully waking aware first of your feet. Not cold, but alert. Sensation still flows. That matters. In winter, circulation is the difference between discomfort and danger. You flex your toes gently and feel warmth respond. The coverings around your feet are soft, layered, forgiving. Nothing stiff, nothing tight. Winter travel begins and ends with feet that still belong to you. You sit up slowly and slip your feet into moccasins waiting nearby. They are positioned carefully turned inward so cold air does not settle inside overnight. You feel how supple they remain even after hours of freezing temperatures outside. This flexibility is intentional. Footwear that hardens in cold becomes an enemy. Materials were chosen because they moved with the body, not against it. Traces left at winter camps show repeated repair of footwear compared to other garments. Soles patched, seams reinforced. This attention reflects a simple truth. You can survive without many things, but not without working feet. Every step tomorrow depends on the care given tonight. You tighten a lace just enough to secure, not constrict. Blood flow must remain free. Snow waits outside, reshaped by wind overnight. You step into it cautiously, testing depth and resistance. Without snowshoes, each step would steal energy fast. You reach for them and feel their lightness. Wide frames distribute weight across the surface, keeping you from sinking. This design appears again and again across snowy regions adapted to local conditions, but guided by the same principle. Spread the load, save the body. You step forward and feel how movement becomes easier. Snowshoes do not eliminate effort, but they prevent exhaustion. Travel remains possible even after heavy snowfall. Marks left by these frames appear across winter landscapes, telling stories of movement rather than struggle. You follow a familiar route, one you trust not to betray you with hidden ice or sudden drifts. There is a small detail that often goes unnoticed. Snowshoes are not worn all the time. You use them when snow depth demands it. You remove them when ground hardens. Carrying them is part of the rhythm. This adaptability keeps you efficient. Evidence from wear patterns suggests frequent on and off use rather than constant attachment. You feel that decision-making happen instinctively now. As you walk, you notice how your feet stay warm through motion rather than insulation alone. Circulation does most of the work. Standing still too long invites cold. You balance movement with rest, stopping briefly in sheltered spots rather than exposed areas. Wind steals warmth fastest when you pause in the wrong place. You learn to read that too. There remains uncertainty about how far winter travel typically extended for different groups, but seasonal patterns suggest short, purposeful journeys rather than wandering. You're not exploring, you're maintaining, checking traps, gathering fuel, visiting nearby camps. Winter movement is focused. Every step has intent. You stop near a stand of trees and rest one foot lightly against the other. This stance conserves heat. You feel the snow squeak again as you shift weight. Dry snow, cold but manageable. Wet snow would require different choices. You file that information away without effort. Footprints matter in winter. Yours tell others where you went. Animal tracks reveal who passed recently. Snow records everything honestly. This transparency changes how you move. You avoid unnecessary wandering. You follow established paths where possible. Safety comes from predictability as much as stealth. A practice that feels almost clever in its simplicity and involves stuffing dry grasses or fur inside footwear during extreme cold. This extra layer traps warmth and absorbs moisture. You adjust your moccasin and feel the difference immediately. Warmth returns to your toes more evenly. This small intervention can turn a dangerous day into a manageable one. As you return towards a shelter, you brush snow from your footwear carefully. Leaving it to melt inside would invite dampness. Dampness invites cold. This routine happens every time without discussion. Habit replaces instruction when stakes are high. Inside again, you remove snowshoes and set them where they can dry slowly. Too close to fire and materials warp. Too far and moisture lingers. Balance appears everywhere in winter life. You place them just right and feel satisfaction settle in. Some researchers question how much winter footwear differed between daily use and travel, but signs point toward multifunctional designs that could adapt rather than specialize. You appreciate that now. Fewer items mean less to manage, less to lose, less to repair. You settle back down, feet tucked safely into warmth once more. They have carried you where you needed to go and will do so again tomorrow. Winter demands gratitude towards small things, feet, hands, tools that work quietly. As sleep returns, you feel comfort in knowing that movement remains possible even in deep cold. You are not trapped by snow and you move across it with care. That confidence eases the mind. And in winter, a calm mind keeps the body warmer than panic ever could. Before night fully claims the sky, your thoughts drift to food. Not hunger exactly, but reassurance. Winter eating is less about appetite and more about continuity. You want to know that tomorrow and the day after that something will still be waiting. You move carefully around the shelter, checking small bundles, containers, hanging stores. Each one represents foresight practice months earlier. The work that keeps you fed tonight began when the days were long. Meat dried slowly in the late summer air. Fish smoked patiently until it carried the scent of preservation. Roots were gathered, cleaned and tucked away. Seeds were sorted with care. Across winter camps, the remains left behind consistently show a reliance on stored foods rather than constant hunting once cold set in. This pattern tells a simple truth. Winter nights are survived by planning done in daylight. You sit and unwrap a portion, noticing how it smells different than fresh food. Deeper, concentrated, preservation changes texture and taste, but it also changes security. You chew slowly, letting warmth spread. Fat matters now more than ever. It fuels heat from the inside. Lean meat fills the stomach, but does little to keep cold at bay. People learned this quickly. Meals shift in winter. Less variety, more purpose. A detail that often slips past modern readers is how storage locations were chosen as carefully as shelter sites. Food was rarely kept in one place alone. Small caches spread risk. If animals found one, others might remain safe. If dampness spoiled one store, another might last. You remember checking several spots earlier, feeling relief each time something remained untouched. You notice how containers are sealed. Bark lids, stone weights, hides tied tight. Everything meant to keep moisture out and pests away. Moisture ruins food faster than cold. This is why storage favours dry places, elevated surfaces, or frozen ground that stays consistently cold. Excavated winter sites often reveal raised platforms and pits designed specifically to manage temperature and humidity. You feel gratitude for those designs now. You eat without haste. Winter meals are not rushed. Digestion itself generates warmth. Eating slowly helps that warmth last longer. You listen to the quiet sounds of others doing the same. No one speaks much. Conversation wastes energy. Silence feels appropriate. There is a small habit you remember being taught. Never finish everything in one container if you do not need to. Spread consumption evenly. This prevents one store from emptying too quickly and reduces the risk of sudden scarcity if something goes wrong elsewhere. It feels almost mathematical, but it is learned through stories of winters when balance was lost. Questions remain about how often fresh food supplemented stores during deep winter. Evidence suggests hunting and trapping continued when conditions allowed, but the emphasis stayed on preservation. You sense why. Moving too much wastes energy. Failed hunts cost more than they give. Stored food turns risk into predictability. You lick your fingers clean and wrap the remainder carefully. Fat left exposed attracts animals and spoils faster. Cleanliness matters more now. Waste invites trouble. You wipe your hands on a scrap of hide and tuck it away for later use. Nothing is thrown out casually. Food also carries memory. Certain tastes signal season. Dried berries remind you of warm days. Smoked fish recalls riverbanks now locked in ice. These reminders steady the mind. Winter can feel endless without markers. Food becomes one of those markers connecting you to cycles beyond the cold. A practice that feels almost subtle involves pairing foods deliberately. Fat with protein, dried plants with meat. This balance helps the body maintain heat longer and prevents fatigue. You feel the effect within minutes. Cold retreats slightly, muscles loosen, sleep feels closer. You notice how food is shared. Portions are modest but fair. No one hoards. Hoarding creates imbalance and a resentment which weaken the group. Winter survival depends on trust. Trust depends on fairness. This social aspect of food matters as much as nutrition. Anthropologists often note that winter feasting patterns differed from summer ones favouring consistency over abundance. You experience that consistency now. Outside the wind shifts, inside the shelter remains calm. Food settles warmly in your stomach. You feel less exposed. Hunger sharpens cold. Satisfaction dulls it. This relationship shapes how evenings unfold. Eating too late disrupts sleep. Eating too early leaves the night long. Timing matters. You recall how elders spoke about listening to the body during winter. Not eating out of boredom. Not ignoring hunger when it appears. Balance again. Everything returns to balance. Winter strips away excess and leaves only what works. There is still uncertainty about how different regions prioritize plant versus animal stores during harsh winters, but what remains clear is that flexibility prevailed. People ate what endured, what traveled well, what sustained warmth. You're not thinking about flavor preferences. You're thinking about tomorrow. You settle back into place, stomach, warm breath, steady. Food has done its job. It will continue to do so quietly through the night. The cold outside presses on, but it feels less threatening now. Inside your body has fuel. The shelter holds. Sleep arrives more easily. As your eyes close, you understand that winter nights are not survived one at a time. They are survived by layering effort across seasons. Food stored in sunlight carries you through darkness. That knowledge feels comforting. Tomorrow there will be more cold, but there will also be something to eat. And that makes all the difference. Warmth tonight does not come only from fire or shelter. It rises slowly from inside you, built from what you ate earlier and what your body knows how to use. You feel it now as a quiet steadiness rather than a rush. Winter teaches you to value this kind of warmth, the kind that lasts. You lie still and notice how the cold feels different when your stomach is satisfied with the right things. Not full, not heavy, but fueled. Fat matters here. It burns slowly, keeps heat moving through muscles long after movement stops. Long observed patterns in winter diets show a clear shift toward foods rich in fat and marrow during the coldest months, especially in regions where nights stretched long and unforgiving. You feel why this mattered. Earlier, when food was prepared, attention lingered on the richest portions. Bones cracked carefully, marrow extracted and shared, nothing rushed. Marrow carries energy in a compact form. It warms the body without filling it excessively. You remember being taught that marrow is winter food, not everyday food. It is saved, respected, used when it matters most. You recall the sound bones make when opened properly. A clean crack, not splintered. This skill takes practice. Broken fragments waste what you need. The interior smells faintly sweet rich. You eat slowly, aware that this nourishment will carry you through hours of stillness. Some archaeological remains show deliberate breakage patterns in winter camps that differ from summer ones, suggesting bones were treated differently when cold demanded every advantage. Tonight you are living that difference. Fat clings to lips and fingers. You wipe them carefully. This substance attracts animals and spoils quickly if mishandled. You respect it. Winter rewards respect. Excess fat is stored in small amounts, often mixed with dried meat or berries, to create foods that travel and endure. These combinations are not accidents. They are solutions refined through repetition. There is a detail that feels almost subtle but matters deeply. Fat eaten before sleep sustains warmth longer than fat eaten earlier in the day. You feel it now hours later as your body resists cooling. This timing shapes evening routines. Meals adjust as daylight fades. Eating becomes part of preparing for rest, not separate from it. You think of hunters returning with animals during colder months. The excitement is tempered by responsibility. Certain parts are prioritized. Organs eaten quickly. Fat distributed. Lean cuts dried or stored. Winter changes the hierarchy of value. What might seem undesirable in summer becomes precious now. Knowledge adapts with the season. The question of how much fat different groups consume during winter varies by region and availability, and the picture remains incomplete. Coastal communities relied heavily on marine sources. Inland groups depended more on large game. Yet the common thread remains clear. Warmth from within mattered as much as warmth from outside. You feel that truth settling in your chest. You shift slightly and feel your breath deepen. Warmth spreads outward slowly. Fingers remain flexible. Toes respond when you wiggle them. This is not accidental. Without enough internal fuel, extremities suffer first. People learn to read these signals early. Tingling means warmth returning. Numbness means danger approaching. You check in with your body without alarm. A small practice often overlooked involves saving fat specifically for elders and children during the hardest nights. Their bodies lose heat faster. Sharing becomes strategic. Fairness in winter is not always equal distribution. It is thoughtful distribution. You see that principle in action around you. No one speaks about it. It simply happens. You remember stories told about winters when fat stores ran low. Those stories are not dramatic. They are quiet warnings. They emphasize restraint, planning, listening to hunger without obeying it blindly. Winter demands discipline without cruelty. You eat enough, not more. As the fire settles lower, internal warmth becomes more important. Embers glow, but they're no longer the primary source. Your body takes over. Fat metabolism works slowly, steadily. This allows the fire to rest. Fuel is saved. Tomorrow will need it too. There is some debate about how consciously these nutritional strategies were understood versus learned through habit, but sitting here the distinction feels thin. Understanding lives in action. You do not need words to know that certain foods keep you warmer longer. You feel it. You trust it. You notice how sleep comes easier when your body feels secure. Hunger keeps people awake, so does cold. Remove both and rest deepens. Your muscles loosen further. Jaw unclenches. Breath slows. Warmth becomes background rather than focus. You think briefly of modern winter diets, often light, often disconnected from cold. You wonder how many people today mistake fullness for warmth. Here you know the difference. Bulk without energy does little. Concentrated nourishment matters more. As hours pass, you wake briefly once then settle again. Warmth holds. No sharp cold creeps in. The shelter remains quiet. The group breathes in unison. Fat consumed earlier continues its quiet way, invisible but essential. You realize that winter survival depends on cooperation between body and environment. Shelter slows heat loss, clothing protects circulation, food fuels warmth. Remove any one piece and the system weakens. Together they form something resilient. Outside, the cold deepens toward its lowest point. Inside, you remain steady. Not hot, not chilled, balanced. That balance feels earned. It feels old. As sleep takes you again, you understand that the coldest nights are not endured by willpower alone. They are carried by knowledge embedded in routine, in when to eat, what to eat, how much to save. Fat and marrow are not luxuries here. They are quiet allies. Morning will come eventually. When it does, movement will draw on the warmth stored now. Tonight you rest knowing your body has what it needs. The cold remains present, but it has been met from the inside out. By the time night deepens again, you are aware of something quieter than cold. The edge of hunger. Not the sharp ache that demands attention, but the softer presence that reminds you food is finite. Winter teaches you to listen to this feeling without panic. Hunger becomes a signal, not a crisis. You acknowledge it, then decide what to do next. You check stores again, not because you doubt them, but because reassurance matters. Each bundle still sits where it should. Each container feels as heavy as expected. This routine steadies the mind. Anxiety burns energy faster than cold ever could. You feel calmer once you confirm that tomorrow's accounted for. Meals in winter are smaller by design, not stingy but measured. You eat to maintain warmth, not to feel full. Over time, people learned that heavy eating late at night could disrupt sleep and waste fuel through restless movement. Instead, nourishment is spaced carefully across the day. This pacing keeps energy levels even and reduces the temptation to overconsume early in the season. You sit quietly and notice how your body responds. Warmth still lingers from earlier. Hunger remains gentle. This balance is intentional. Patterns observed in winter camps suggest that people favored steady intake over feast and famine cycles during prolonged cold. Stability mattered more than indulgence. You feel the wisdom of that choice now. Sharing food becomes more than courtesy, it becomes structure. Portions are distributed with an eye toward need rather than appetite. Those who worked hardest that day receive slightly more. Those who rest receive enough. No one is ignored. This approach reduces tension and prevents resentment, which can fracture a group faster than hunger itself. There is a habit you remember being taught that seems simple but carries weight. Never eat alone in winter unless necessary. Eating together allows portions to be observed and adjusted. It also reinforces trust. Trust reduces fear. Fear amplifies hunger. You see how these threads connect now. When food runs lower than expected, choices shift. Meals become simpler, variety decreases, but the core remains: fat, protein. Enough plant matter to keep digestion comfortable. This adaptability appears again and again in winter survival accounts. Rather than rigid plans, people adjusted calmly to what remained. Panic was the real enemy. You think of winters when stores ran thin before thaw arrived. Stories passed down speak of those times carefully. They focus less on suffering and more on decisions. When to tighten portions, when to move camps, when to risk a hunt despite cold. These stories teach restraint without despair. You feel their presence as guidance rather than warning. The cold sharpens awareness of the community dynamics. Hunger reveals character. Generosity becomes visible. So does selfishness. Groups that survived harsh winters did so not just through skill, but through cohesion. Sharing warmth and food binds people together in ways summer never demands. Winter stripped away pretense. You notice how conversation around food stays practical. There is no romanticizing scarcity, no dramatizing of hardship. This grounded approach keeps focus on solutions, complaints waste energy, planning preserves it. You adopt that mindset naturally. A small but meaningful practice involves setting aside emergency rations that are not touched unless conditions become extreme. These stores are acknowledged but left alone. Their presence provides psychological comfort. Knowing they exist allows normal rations to be used without fear. You feel that comfort now even if you hope never to rely on them. There is still uncertainty about how often true famine conditions occurred before spring, and evidence varies widely by region and year. What remains consistent is the emphasis on early adjustment rather than last-minute desperation. People who responded quickly to dwindling supplies fared better than those who waited too long. You feel grateful to inherit that lesson. As the night progresses, hunger fades into the background. Warmth from earlier meals sustains you. The body adapts to less without protest when changes happen gradually. This adaptability is one of winter's quiet gifts. You learn that you need less than you thought, provided what you have is used wisely. You lie down again and listen to breathing around you. It remains slow and steady. No one tosses restlessly. No one wakes from discomfort. This tells you portions were right. When food is mismanaged, sleep suffers. Tonight, sleep comes easily. You reflect briefly on modern relationships with hunger, often driven by clock rather than need. Here, hunger is respected, but not indulged. It becomes part of the landscape like cold or darkness, something to navigate, not eliminate. As you drift closer to sleep, you feel a sense of quiet confidence. The edge of hunger no longer worries you. It reminds you to stay attentive, to plan, to share. These habits protect you more effectively than any single meal could. Outside, winter continues its slow work. Inside, you remain steady. Hunger and cold are present, but neither dominates. Balance holds. That balance is the true achievement of winter survival. You close your eyes knowing that tomorrow will bring the same careful choices. Eat enough, save enough, share enough. This rhythm carries you forward night after night until the land finally loosens its grip and allows warmth to return. Night has a sound in winter that you do not hear at other times of year. It is thinner, sharper at the edges. When you wake briefly, it is a sound that reaches you before thought does. A distant branch cracking, snow sliding from a roof, the faint rush of wind moving across frozen ground. These sounds do not mean danger by themselves, but they ask for attention. You lie still and listen carefully. Movement wastes warmth, panic wastes more. You sort the sounds by familiarity. That crack belongs to cold tightening wood. That soft thump is snow settling. Your breathing slows once the world makes sense again. Winter teaches you to listen before reacting. Outside sound travels farther now. Frozen air carries noise cleanly. A footstep can be heard long before it is seen. This changes how you sleep. You remain lightly aware even while resting. Archaeological sites show that winter camps often positioned sleeping areas so entrances and open spaces could be heard clearly from within. You feel that design choice working now. Nothing approaches unnoticed. Inside the shelter, sound behaves differently. Rounded walls soften echoes. Packed earth absorbs vibration. The quiet feels intentional. Even voices earlier in the evening stayed low, as if the space itself encouraged restraint. You remember being taught not to shout in winter shelters. Loud sound wastes energy and disturbs calm. Calm keeps people warm. There is a subtle shift in how people respond to night sounds during winter. In warmer seasons, sudden noise might prompt immediate movement. Now you wait first. Assess. Decide. Many winter injuries happen when people move too quickly in response to fear. Slipping on ice, colliding in darkness. Winter rewards patience. You hear an animal outside, distant but present. The sound is familiar, not a threat. Animals move closer to human shelters in winter, drawn by scent and warmth. This is expected. You remain alert without alarm. Knowing which sounds matter is a learned skill. Elders taught it by example, pointing out differences rather than issuing warnings. Snow continues to fall lightly, each flake muffles the world further. The shelter grows quieter as layers build outside. This silence is not emptiness. It is insulation. Sound trapped by snow cannot startle you. You feel grateful for this quiet knowing it will not last forever. Wind will return, storms will come. A small habit reveals itself when someone stirs nearby. They pause first, listen, then move slowly. No one jolts awake unless something truly unfamiliar intrudes. This shared discipline keeps the shelter calm. Sleep remains possible even when awareness stays close to the surface. You think about how winter night sounds shaped story and belief. Long darkness encourages imagination. Strange noises invite explanation. Yet here explanations remain grounded. A fox, a shifting drift, a frozen tree. Naming things correctly reduces fear. Fear drains heat. You feel the logic of this approach settle in your chest. The fire responds softly when a log shifts. A muted pop. Embers glow brighter then settle. Fire has its own voice. You know it well. Changes in its sound tell you when fuel needs adjustment or when ash has settled too tightly. You do not act yet. The sound is steady enough. There is still uncertainty about how much night watching occurred in winter camps compared to other seasons, but many accounts suggest rotating awareness rather than formal guard duty. People rested in turns not through rigid schedules but through shared responsibility. You feel that trust now. You're not alone in listening. You adjust your position slightly, careful not to disturb others. Bedding rustles softly. That sound is safe, familiar. It tells you someone else is awake and aware. Shared awareness lowers individual burden. Winter survival depends on this unspoken coordination. Outside, the animal moves away. Silence returns. You let your breath deepen again. Muscles relax. Heat stays where it belongs. You have learned not to chase every noise. Stillness conserves warmth and clarity. You reflect briefly on how modern nights are filled with constant sound. Machines, traffic, artificial noise that never rests. Here sound means something. Each noise carries information. This makes listening feel purposeful rather than exhausting. As sleep pulls you back under, you remain lightly tuned to the world. Dreams come and go without fully taking over. This half-rest, half-awareness feels natural now. Winter sleep is not the deep oblivion of summer. It is a partnership between rest and readiness. Hours pass. The cold outside reaches its deepest point. Inside the shelter remains steady. Sound continues its quiet conversation. Nothing demands action. That too is information. Just before morning, the quality of sound shifts again. Wind slackens. Snowfall stops. The world feels suspended. You sense this change before seeing it. Dawn approaches even if light has not yet arrived. You settle fully into rest one last time, knowing the night has been navigated successfully. Listening kept you safe. Patience kept you warm. Winter night sounds no longer feel mysterious. They feel familiar, interpretable. As sleep deepens, you trust that if something truly changes, you will know. Until then, you rest within the quiet winter has granted, wrapped in stillness that protects as effectively as walls or fire ever could. Breathing becomes something you notice more in winter, especially at night. Not because it feels difficult, but because it matters. You wake briefly aware of the air itself, how it moves, how it rests against your face. Cold air behaves differently than warm air. It sinks, it thickens, it lingers if you let it. Learning how to live with it takes patience. You inhale slowly and feel the air enter cool then warm as it reaches deeper. Your breath leaves again as a faint cloud barely visible in the dim light. That tells you something important. The shelter is sealed enough to hold warmth, but not so sealed that air stagnates. This balance took time to learn. People did not arrive at it all at once. It emerged through long winter, trial and quiet correction. Openings in the shelter are small and deliberate. Not holes left by accident, but spaces shaped to guide air where it is needed. Warm breath rises, smoke rises, cold air settles low. By allowing air to circulate gently rather than rush, the shelter stays breathable without bleeding heat. Remains of winter dwellings often show carefully positioned vents that change slightly from season to season, suggesting constant adjustment rather than fixed design. You feel that flexibility working now. You notice how people avoid breathing directly toward one another during sleep. Faces angle slightly away. This keeps moisture from building up on shared coverings. Dampness invites cold. It also invites illness. Winter magnifies small problems quickly. A cough that lingers becomes a concern when cold air sharpens every breath. There is a faint scent of smoke still present, but it is not heavy. It reminds you that fire burned here earlier, doing its job and then resting. Smoke management is part of winter survival. Too much irritates lungs and eyes. Too little ventilation suffocates slowly. Finding the middle ground required observation rather than instruction. You imagine earlier winters when people learn this lesson the hard way, adjusting openings by feel rather than measurement. A subtle habit appears as you watch others breathe in sleep. Mouths stay closed when possible. Nose breathing warms air before it reaches the lungs. Cold air taken in too sharply can sting, wake, or exhaust. Children are often reminded gently to breathe through their noses in winter. You do the same without thinking. Your throat stays comfortable. Sleep deepens. You remember stories of shelters sealed too tightly during storms, trapping smoke inside. Those stories are told quietly without drama. They are reminders rather than warnings. Knowledge survives best when it is woven into memory instead of fear. Tonight, that knowledge keeps air moving just enough to sustain you. There is still no clear agreement on how often winter shelters were adjusted daily versus left unchanged for weeks at a time. Evidence suggests constant small changes. A vent widened slightly after snowfall. An opening narrowed when wind shifted. You appreciate this responsiveness. The shelter breathes because people let it. You feel warmth pool near the floor again. Bodies share that space willingly. The ceiling remains cooler. This temperature layering keeps everyone comfortable. You avoid raising your head too high. Even that small movement would place your face in colder air. Winter teaches economy of motion. A quiet practice involves gently brushing frost from interior surfaces when it appears. Frost means moisture has condensed and frozen. Left unchecked, it melts later and dampens bedding. Someone does this earlier, barely noticed. The shelter remains dry. Dry air feels easier to breathe. Easier breathing keeps sleep smooth. You listen to your breath slow. Each inhale feels complete. Each exhale unhurried. Anxiety often tightens breathing, making cold feel sharper. Calm breathing softens it. This connection between breath and warmth becomes clear in winter. You breathe well and you stay warmer. You breathe poorly and cold creeps inward. You think briefly of a modern building sealed so tightly that air must be forced in mechanically. Here, air moves naturally, guided by design and attention. The result feels gentler. The shelter responds to weather rather than resisting it outright. That responsiveness keeps it livable. Someone near you shifts and exhales a long breath. The sound reassures you. Everyone is breathing easily. No one coughs persistently. No one wakes in distress. These small signs matter more than any measurement. They tell you the balance is holding. Outside wind brushes past again, but it does not force air inward aggressively. The shelter flexes. Air slips through openings and moves on. You feel no sudden chill. This tells you the openings are placed correctly. Cold passes without settling. As the night continues, breathing becomes background again. You stop thinking about it consciously. That is the goal. When breathing disappears from attention, it means the system is working. Winter demands awareness, but it also rewards when things are done right by allowing rest. You sink deeper into sleep, confident that the air will continue to move as needed. The shelter will not steal your breath. The cold will not sharpen it into pain. Breath and warmth remain in quiet partnership. Morning will bring movement, smoke, and new adjustments. For now, the night asks only that you breathe and rest. You do both easily. Cold remains outside, present but contained. Inside, the air stays alive, steady and kind enough to carry you through another winter night. Illness feels different in winter. You notice it not as the sudden end, but as a gradual imbalance. A cough that lingers a little too long. A heaviness in the chest that does not warm easily. A body that does not respond to heat the way it should. Cold exposes weakness quietly without drama, and that is why attention matters so much. You wake and listen for these signs not only in yourself but in others. Breathing patterns, movement during sleep, small sounds of discomfort. Winter does not allow illness to be ignored. When the cold presses in, even minor sickness can grow dangerous if left unattended. You understand this instinctively. Care becomes part of survival. People shift positions gently to keep the most vulnerable closer to warmth. Someone with shallow breathing rests nearer the fire. Someone with a fever is kept from sweating too much. The goal is balance, not extremes. Heat helps, but overheating weakens. Cool air soothes, but too much invites chills. These adjustments happen quietly without instructions spoken aloud. Traces left in winter's dwellings suggest that care spaces were not separate rooms but flexible zones within shared shelters. Bedding could be rearranged, fire adjusted, ventilation altered slightly. This adaptability allowed illness to be managed without isolating people completely. You feel how important that is. Isolation brings cold. Cold worsens illness. A small practice stands out. Warm drinks are given slowly and often even when appetite fades. Liquid warmth reaches places solid food cannot. It eases breathing. It steadies the body. You remember being handed a small cup earlier, encouraged to sip rather than gulp. That memory returns now as comfort. Herbs appear quietly in winter care, not as cures but as support to supplant these coughing. Others soothe the stomach or calm restlessness. These are not miracle solutions. They are helpers. Knowledge of which plants to keep through winter mattered. Some were dried carefully months earlier, saved for nights like this. There is still uncertainty about how widespread specific medicinal practices were across regions, but evidence shows repeated use of certain treatments in winter contexts. This repetition suggests trust earned over time rather than coincidence. You feel that trust now, even if you cannot name every ingredient. You notice how people avoid crowding someone who's unwell even though warmth is shared. Space is adjusted thoughtfully, enough closeness to keep heat steady, enough distance to allow breath to move freely. Moist air spreads sickness faster in closed spaces. Winter care requires this delicate balance. Sleep becomes medicine too. Those who are unwell are encouraged to rest deeply shielded from unnecessary noise. Stories quiet down earlier. Movements soften. The shelter grows calmer. Calm supports healing. You feel how the entire group participates in this effort, without complaint. You think about how winter changes attitudes toward health. In warmer seasons, sickness can be endured with activity. In winter, rest becomes essential. Overexertion weakens recovery. This shift in pace protects lives. Winter forces patience. A subtle habit involves warming bedding for someone who feels chilled beyond comfort. Stones heated carefully near the fire are wrapped and placed at feet or sides. Not hot enough to burn, just warm enough to encourage circulation. This practice appears in many cold weather traditions shaped by observation rather than instruction. You feel how effective it is almost immediately. Breathing sounds soften as warmth spreads. A cough eases. Muscles relax. These small improvements matter. Winter care focuses on preventing decline rather than demanding instant recovery. You accept that healing takes time, especially when cold resists every effort. There are stories of winters when illness spread despite care, and those stories are told carefully without blame. They emphasize limits. even with knowledge not every outcome could be controlled. This honesty keeps expectations realistic. Winter teaches humility alongside skill. You notice how food choices adjust for those who are unwell. Easier to digest. Rich in energy without demanding effort. Broths, soft foods, fat combined gently with warmth. These choices support the body without strain. You feel gratitude for this attention to detail. As the night deepens, you listen again. Breathing remains steady. No new sounds of distress appear. That reassurance allows everyone to rest more fully. Shared vigilance gives way to shared sleep. You reflect on how winter illness management depends on community more than individual strength. No one heals alone in the cold. Warmth, food, and attention are shared resources. This sharing strengthens bonds even as it protects health. Outside, cold remains relentless. Inside, care creates a pocket of resilience. The shelter holds warmth. The group holds one another. Illness does not disappear, but it is met with knowledge and patience. You settle back into sleep knowing that if you wake again, it will be to listen, to adjust, to care. Winter nights demand this quiet responsibility. It's not burdensome. It is simply part of staying alive together. As the night settles again, your awareness shifts toward those who need the most attention when winter tightens its grip. Children breathe faster. Elders breathe slower. Bodies at the edges of strength reveal cold sooner than others. You sense this without being told. Winter sharpens your perception of vulnerability. You notice how sleeping arrangements change subtly because of this. The youngest are placed where warmth gathers naturally. Not directly beside the fire, but near enough to benefit without risk. Elders are positioned where drafts are weakest, where air remains steady through the night. These decisions happen quietly without discussion, shaped by long familiarity rather than rules. You remember being small yourself, tucked between bodies that felt impossibly warm. Winter nights then felt endless but safe. That memory informs how you move now. Protection becomes instinctual. You adjust bedding gently around a smaller body nearby, careful not to wake them. The shift of warmth is immediate. Cold affects children differently. They lose heat faster. They forget to stay still. They wake easily. Winter care adapts to this. Extra layers are added. Movement is encouraged before sleep to warm muscles, then gently slowed. Songs are used not just for comfort, but to regulate breathing. Rhythm steadies the body. You hear a soft hum earlier and feel its calming effect linger. Elders bring different needs. Their warmth builds slowly. Their joints stiffen. Sudden cold hurts more deeply. You watch how they are supported into comfortable positions, how limbs are cushioned to reduce strain. There is respect here, but also practicality. Winter demands efficiency even in care. Comfort preserves strength. Strength preserves life. Remains found in winter shelters often show careful layering of bedding in areas associated with elders and children, suggesting repeated attention to these needs over time. You feel connected to those past choices now. They echo in your hands as you tuck, adjust, and settle others. Food portions change as well. Smaller bodies receive more frequent warmth through drink and fat. Elders are offered nourishment earlier in the evening, allowing digestion to contribute to warmth before the coldest hours arrive. These timing choices are subtle, but they matter. You feel the shelter grow quieter once everyone has what they need. There is a small practice that feels almost tender. Someone wakes briefly in the night to check foreheads and hands, not anxiously, just attentively. Too warm is as concerning as too cold. Balance again. Everything returns to balance. You take your turn without ceremony, then rest again. Children sometimes stir from dreams made sharper by winter darkness. When they do, reassurance comes quickly. A hand on the back. A whisper. No long explanations. Calm presence does more than words. Fear increases heat loss. Safety conserves it. You watch a child settle again within seconds. breath slowing, body relaxing back into shared warmth. Elders often sleep lighter, waking more often. This is not seen as weakness. It becomes another layer of awareness. They notice changes in windfire or sound before others do. Their wakefulness contributes to group safety. Winter redistributes roles, quietly honouring different strengths. There is no single approach to caring for vulnerable members across all regions. Some winters are harsher than others. Some groups have more resources. Others rely more heavily on movement or shared shelter. What remains consistent is attention. Winter punishes neglect more harshly than ignorance. You think about how illness intersects with age in cold months. Children recover quickly but fall ill easily. Elders resist illness longer but recover slowly. Care adjusts accordingly. You see warm liquids offered patiently. You hear gentle reminders to rest. Winter care is not rushed. Rushing creates mistakes. Stories told earlier in the evening often serve another purpose here. They establish continuity. Children hear that winters have been survived before. Elders hear their knowledge reflected back to them. This exchange reinforces trust across generations. Trust reduces stress. Stress weakens the body. You notice how no one sleeps alone in winter, unless necessary. Isolation increases risk for those least able to respond quickly. Shared space allows immediate help if something shifts. You feel reassured knowing that if you woke unwell, someone would notice before cold made it worse. A small detail reveals itself in how bedding is arranged. Softer materials near faces, firmer support under backs and hips. These choices prevent pressure points that restrict circulation. Circulation keeps warmth moving. Even sleep posture becomes a form of care. As the night deepens, the cold outside reaches again toward its lowest point. Inside, warmth holds steady. You listen for signs of discomfort. None arise. Breathing remains even. The shelter remains calm. That calm is earned through attention rather than effort. You reflect on how winter changes the meaning of responsibility. In warmer months, independence feels possible. In winter, interdependence becomes essential. Children, elders, and those in between rely on one another. Survival weaves people together more tightly than any spoken agreement. Modern life often treats vulnerability as something to be hidden or solved quickly. Here it is acknowledged and integrated. Winter survival does not demand everyone be strong in the same way. It demands that strength be shared. You settle back into sleep confident that the arrangement holds. The most vulnerable are protected. The rest of the group remains aware. This balance allows everyone to rest more deeply. Outside, the cold remains firm and unyielding. Inside, care softens its impact. Winter does not disappear. It is simply met with attention, patience, and shared warmth. As sleep takes you again, you feel gratitude for this quiet system of care that asks little but gives much. Another night moves toward morning. Children dream, elders rest. The shelter holds, and winter, for all its sharpness, is kept at a respectful distance. When the night stretches long, people reach for more than warmth and food. They reach for meaning. You feel this shift as the fire dims and voices soften. Winter invites stories not as entertainment but as structure. Darkness can unmoor the mind if left empty. Stories give it something to rest against. You sit quietly and listen as someone begins to speak. The voice is low, steady, unhurried. The story is familiar. But that familiarity is part of its power. Knowing what comes next allows your body to relax. There is no surprise waiting to startle you. Predictability is comfort when the world outside feels uncertain. These stories often circle around seasons rather than events. How winter came once before, how people learned to listen to it, how patience saved lives. You notice how the story does not glorify struggle. It emphasizes endurance, listening, choosing the right moment to act. This tone matters. Winter does not reward bravado. You feel the shelter respond as people settle into stillness. Even children grow quiet. Rhythm replaces chatter. Words arrive slowly, leaving space between them. This pacing calms breathing. Calm breathing keeps bodies warm. You feel the connection without analysing it. Songs sometimes follow. Simple ones, repetitive, easy to remember. The repetition is intentional. It gives the mind something steady to hold. Singing together synchronizes breath. Breath warms air. Warm air lingers. You feel warmth deepen slightly as voices blend, then fade. Some songs are barely more than hums. They fill the space without demanding attention. You rest your head and let the sound wash over you. Sound becomes insulation of a different kind. It softens the edges of the night. Objects may be passed quietly. A carved piece of wood, a bundle of feathers, something small that holds meaning. Touch anchors you. Feeling texture keeps the mind present rather than drifting toward worry. These gestures are gentle. No one insists. Participation is invited, not required. You notice how stories change slightly each time they are told. Details shift. Emphasis moves. This flexibility allows stories to remain useful across different winters. What matters is not accuracy, but relevance. Stories adapt the way shelters and routines do. The fire responds to voices flaring briefly as someone adjusts a log, then settling again. Light flickers across faces. Expressions soften. Shared attention creates safety. Winter thrives on isolation. These moments push back against it. Children begin to yawn. Their bodies recognize the cue. Stories signal that rest is coming. Sleep follows ritual more easily than command. You feel your own eyelids grow heavy as familiar phrases repeat. For elders, stories offer something else. Continuity. They hear echoes of their own teachers, their own winters survived. Their presence gives weight to the words. Their listening matters as much as their speaking. The content of the stories often circles back to care. How people watched out for one another. How mistakes were corrected without shame. How survival was shared. These lessons slip into the mind quietly, ready to surface later when needed. You think about how modern nights are often filled with distraction rather than ritual. Screens, noise, endless novelty. Here repetition is chosen. It steadies rather than dulls. Winter demands steadiness. As the last story fades, silence returns gently. No one rushes to fill it. Silence feels earned now. It holds the warmth left by words and sound. You breathe slowly and feel calm spread through your chest. The shelter settles into sleep as one. Fire dims further. Voices cease. The night no longer feels empty. It feels held. Outside, cold remains unchanged. Inside, meaning has softened its impact. Stories did their work without fanfare. They prepared minds for rest the same way food prepared bodies. You lie down and feel sleep arrive smoothly without resistance. Ritual has guided you here. Winter nights no longer stretch endlessly. They are shaped, filled, and finally released. As dreams begin, they carry echoes of voices and warmth. The night continues, but you are no longer counting its hours. Meaning has replaced waiting, and that makes all the difference. Sleep changes its shape in winter. You feel this as you drift in and out, not sinking all at once, but moving through layers of rest. Darkness lasts longer now, and your body responds by stretching sleep into something wider and more flexible. You wake briefly, then rest again without frustration. This rhythm belongs to the season. You notice how dreams arrive differently. They are quieter, less crowded. Sometimes they feel more like thoughts than stories. Images drift in and out without sharp edges. This gentler dreaming makes waking easier. You're never startled back into the cold. You simply surface, check your surroundings, and sink again. Winter sleep is not meant to erase awareness. It keeps a thin thread connecting you to the world. You hear the fire settle. You feel someone shift nearby. You register the shelter holding steady. These signals reassure you and allow rest to deepen rather than interrupt it. Your body temperature drops slightly during sleep, as it always does, but not dangerously. Shared warmth and insulation slow the change. You curl a little tighter without fully waking. This adjustment happens automatically now. Muscle memory takes over where conscious thought would waste energy. Time behaves differently here. Without bright light or strict schedules, sleep follows internal cues. You rest when tired. You wake when awareness returns. This flexibility supports recovery. People in winter camps often slept in segments rather than one long stretch, allowing bodies to warm, adjust, and rest again. You experience this pattern naturally without labeling it. A small sound wakes you. Someone adds a piece of wood to the fire. The flame brightens briefly, heat pulses outward. You feel it reach your face, then fade to a steady glow. You do not open your eyes. The sound alone tells you what happened. You trust that someone is watching while you rest. Your breathing slows further. Inhale, exhale. Each breath feels complete. Cold air does not sting. Warmth remains close. This ease allows your muscles to let go of tension held earlier in the day. Winter labor is heavy. Sleep repairs what movement strains. You dream of walking through snow without effort. Your feet do not sink. The surface holds you gently. This dream feels comforting rather than strange. It reflects how snow has become familiar rather than threatening. Dreams often echo what the body has learned. You wake briefly with a sense of calm. Someone coughs softly, then settles. You note the sound and file it away. No urgency, no alarm. Winter teaches you to distinguish between noise and signal even while half asleep. This skill protects rest. You shift slightly and feel bedding respond. The layers remain where they should. No cold spot appears. This consistency allows deeper sleep to follow. Small disruptions in warmth often wake people fully. Tonight, there are none. As hours pass, your body cycles through rest and awareness several times. Each cycle leaves you more relaxed. Muscles release, joints loosen. The cold outside feels distant, almost abstract. Inside, warmth remains tangible. You think briefly about how modern sleep often aims for uninterrupted oblivion. Here, rest is more like a tide. It moves in and out, carrying you with it. This pattern suits winter. It keeps you responsive without exhausting you. At one point, you wake fully enough to look around. Firelight is low. Shadows barely move. Everyone appears settled. You feel a quiet satisfaction. This is what a good winter night looks like. Nothing dramatic, nothing wrong. You lie back down and let sleep return. Your mind drifts without resistance. Thoughts slow, images blur. You're no longer tracking time. The night simply unfolds. Outside, the cold continues its steady work. Inside, your body continues its own. Repairing, conserving, adjusting. Sleep and warmth cooperate to keep you functional. As dawn approaches, you sense it before light appears. The quality of darkness shifts. Sounds change slightly. Birds remain silent, but the air feels less heavy. You wake one last time aware that morning's not far. You do not rise yet. Rising too early wastes warmth. You wait for the right moment. Winter mornings reward patience as much as nights do. You rest a little longer, letting the last stretch of sleep finish its work. When you finally open your eyes, you feel rested rather than groggy. The segmented sleep has done its job. You're ready to move when needed. Cold has not stolen your strength. Sleep has guarded it. You sit up slowly and take stock. Body warm, mind clear, surroundings calm. Another winter night has passed without incident. This success is quiet, but it matters. You realize that winter sleep is not something endured. It is something shaped, adjusted, learned. Once understood, it becomes an ally rather than an obstacle. As you prepare for the day ahead, you carry this knowledge with you. Rest is not just absence of movement, it is an active part of survival. In winter, sleep keeps the body ready for whatever the cold brings next. Morning light finally reaches you thin and pale, and with it comes the quiet reminder that winter does not feel the same everywhere. Even now, wrapped in warmth, you sense that what keeps you safe here would not work the same way somewhere else. The land shapes winter, and winter shapes the people who live within it. You feel that truth settle as you imagine other places waking under the same cold sky. Far to the north, where trees thin and the ground stays frozen for most of the year, winter is longer, darker, more absolute. There, shelter must resist not just cold, but endless night and wind that never seems to tire. Snow becomes wall and roof. Movement follows strict rules. You picture how warmth there depends on sealing space tightly and relying heavily on fat that burns slowly for weeks at a time. The cold does not flirt. It commits. Further south, across wide plains, winter behaves differently. Wind becomes the main challenge. It scours open ground and steals heat faster than low temperatures alone ever could. You imagine shelters shaped to slip beneath that wind, rounded and low-anchored firmly. Mobility matters more here. When storms roll in, the ability to move to better ground can mean survival. Fire must be shielded carefully. Snow can pile fast and disappear just as quickly. In forested regions, winter feels enclosed rather than exposed. Trees break the wind, but they also trap moisture. Snow gathers quietly on branches, then drops suddenly with sharp sound. You think about how shelter here must breathe differently, allowing damp air to escape while keeping warmth close. Wood is abundant, but managing smoke becomes more delicate. The forest offers protection, but it demands attention. Further still in regions many imagine as warm winter nights still bite sharply. Deserts cool quickly once the sun drops. Stone holds heat briefly, then releases it into the dark. You feel how winter there requires insulation against cold nights rather than long freezes. Fires burn small. Clothing layers adapt to dramatic swings between day and night. Water becomes as important as warmth. You realize that no single winter story exists. Each place teaches its own version of survival. Techniques that feel essential here would fail elsewhere. Knowledge remains local, precise, tuned to particular ground and sky. This is why generalizations fall apart quickly. Winter insists on specificity. You think about how people recognize these differences long before maps or measurements. Travel revealed contrasts immediately. Snow felt heavier here, drier there. Wind behaved differently across open ground than among trees. Nights cooled faster near stone than soil. These observations shaped choices quickly. Adaptation followed. There is no clean line separating these winter experiences. Borders blur, plains meet forests, forests give way to mountains, strategies overlap and blend. People borrow ideas, adjust them, discard what does not fit. Survival remains flexible rather than fixed. You imagine traveling from one region to another during winter. Knowledge gained in one place would help, but only partly. You would have to listen again, watch again, feel again. Winter would correct assumptions without apology. That humility keeps people alive. The way food is stored shifts with region. The way shelters are shaped shifts too. Even sleep arrangements change. In harsher climates, bodies cluster tighter. In milder ones, space opens slightly. These adjustments feel small, but they accumulate into resilience. You sense how misunderstandings arise when outsiders assume winter is universal. What works in forest looks wasteful on the plains. What works in the north looks excessive in the south. Each system makes sense only where it belongs. Winter does not reward copying without understanding. You reflect on how this regional knowledge is passed along, through travel stories, through marriages that bridge landscapes, through trade that carries not just goods but habits. Someone returns from another place with a new way to bank snow or shape a doorway. The idea is tested. If it works, it stays. If not, it fades. You feel gratitude for the specificity of your own place. You know its wind, its snow, its rhythm. This familiarity reduces effort. It turns survival into routine rather than struggle. Winter becomes something you live with, not something you fight. As the morning grows brighter, you picture all these winters unfolding at once across the continent. Different sounds, different shelters, different solutions, yet the same quiet goal everywhere: to stay warm enough to stay fed, to wake again. This realization brings a sense of connection rather than distance. People far away are doing the same careful work, just with different tools and landscapes. Winter binds them together through shared attention. You rise slowly, preparing for the day. Whatever tasks await will be shaped by this place, this winter, this moment. You carry no illusion that one method fits all. Instead, you carry respect for how many ways cold can be met. As you step into the light, you feel grounded by this understanding. Winter varies, but knowledge adapts. That adaptability has carried people through countless nights like the ones you have just lived. Another day begins, cold remains, but so does the skill to live within it. Some nights arrive with warning, others come suddenly carrying more weight than expected. You feel this one building long before it fully arrives. The air tightens, wind pauses, then returns sharper. Snow that once fell gently now feels driven, purposeful. This is the kind of night that tests everything you know, not because it's unfamiliar, but because it demands precision. You move earlier than usual, securing what can be secured. Entrances narrowed slightly, loose materials checked. Firewood pulled closer. These actions are not frantic, they are practiced. When winter escalates, speed comes from familiarity rather than urgency. You trust your hands to know what to do. Outside, the sky disappears behind moving snow. Visibility shrinks to a few body lengths. Sound changes too. Wind roars unevenly, then drops into pockets of heavy silence. You listen for patterns within the chaos. This storm is not steady. It surges. That tells you something. Shelter must be ready for pressure from different angles. You step inside and feel relief immediately. The shelter holds, but you know this night will ask more of it. Fire must be managed carefully. Too large and smoke builds dangerously as wind interferes with airflow. Too small and warmth fades too quickly. You adjust fuel in small increments, watching how flame responds. The fire answers slowly, then settles into a controlled glow. People gather closer without being told. Bodies tighten into shared warmth. This is not comfort-seeking. It is efficiency. In severe cold, every degree matters. Heat lost from one person becomes heat gained by another when space is shared. You feel the temperature stabilize as everyone settles. Snow begins to press against the shelter more aggressively now. You hear it scrape and thud. Weight accumulates. This can be helpful. Snow insulates, but too much weight stresses the structure. You listen for creaks that sound different from normal settling. Nothing alarming yet. You stay alert. Someone moves to clear snow from a critical edge, working carefully briefly, then returning inside. Exposure is minimized. Timing matters. Clearing too often wastes energy. Waiting too long risks collapse. This balance is learned through winters when mistakes were remembered clearly. Inside, breathing remains steady. Oh, no one speaks unless necessary. Words scatter focus. Focus matters now. You communicate with glances and small movements. Shared understanding replaces instruction. Winter storms reward groups that can operate quietly together. You feel cold try to creep back in through the floor. The storm has shifted air patterns. You add another layer beneath bedding, redistributing materials rather than adding new ones. This conserves resources and addresses the problem directly. The change works. Cold retreats again. Time stretches during nights like this. You stop counting hours, you measure progress in checks. Fire steady, structure holding, breathing calm. Each successful check is a small victory that carries you forward. Anxiety has no place here. It wastes attention. The wind howls again louder now. The shelter responds with a low groan, then stillness. This sound is not failure. It is adaptation. Materials flex, then settle into a new equilibrium. You trust this response because you have heard it before. New sounds would worry you. Familiar ones reassure. Someone shifts and knocks over a small object. The sound is sharp in the quiet between gusts. You all freeze briefly listening. Nothing follows, you relax again. Even mistakes are manageable when attention stays focused. Heat from the fire spreads unevenly during storms. Airflow changes constantly. You reposition slightly, choosing a place where warmth pools. This movement is slow, deliberate. A sudden shift stir cold air and disrupt balance. You settle and feel warmth return gradually. Food is not eaten much during nights like this. Digestion draws energy inward. You save eating for when movement or recovery is needed. Instead, warm drinks are passed carefully. Liquid warmth supports circulation without burdening the body. You sip slowly and feel steadiness return. Snow continues to pile. At some point you stop hearing individual impacts. The sound becomes a constant pressure. This tells you accumulation is heavy. You mark the moment mentally. If it continues this way, another clearing will be needed later. You do not act yet. Timing remains everything. The cold reaches deeper than usual tonight. You feel it testing fingers and toes despite layers. You respond with movement that stays within the shelter. Flexing, curling, extending slowly. Circulation improves. You avoid sweating. Sweat would turn this night dangerous quickly. There is no panic. No raised voices. This calm is not accidental. It comes from having faced nights like this before. Severe cold loses some of its power once you know its habits. It remains dangerous, but it becomes readable. You notice how children remain settled, tucked into warmth, shielded from the storm's worst effects. Elders rest quietly, their lighter sleep contributing to awareness. Everyone plays a role without assignment. Winter reorganizes responsibility naturally. Eventually, the wind begins to shift. Gusts grow less violent. Snowfall eases slightly. You sense this change before it fully arrives. Pressure on the shelter lightens. Sound becomes less aggressive. The storm is moving on. You do not celebrate yet. Storms often return suddenly. You maintain vigilance. Fire remains controlled. Bedding stays arranged. The group stays close. Only when calm holds for long enough do muscles begin to loosen. As exhaustion sets in, you allow yourself to rest more deeply. The hardest part has passed. The shelter has proven itself again. Knowledge is held. The cold has pushed hard, but it has been answered. When sleep finally claims you, it does so with weight. This is deeper rest than usual, earned through sustained attention. Your body releases tension slowly, carefully. Dreams remain distant. You sleep like someone who has done necessary work. Morning will reveal what the storm left behind. Drifts, changes in terrain, new challenges, but you will face those later. For now, you rest knowing that the coldest kind of night has come and gone, and you are still here. That non-knowledge carries warmth of its own. When daylight finally returns after a night like that, it feels thinner than usual, as if the storm has scraped something from the air. You wake slowly, body heavy but intact. The cold did not win. It tested, pressed, and then moved on. You take a moment to notice how different this feels from fighting the weather. Nothing here feels conquered. Everything feels adjusted. You sit up carefully, listening first. Silence has a particular quality after severe cold. The wind no longer pushes, snow no longer hammers. What remains is a deep, almost respectful stillness. This is the moment when mistakes reveal themselves. A draft you missed, a seam that loosened, a place where snow pressed too hard. You scan the shelter with calm attention. Small issues appear. They always do. A bit of moisture where breath condensed overnight. A thin line of snow that slipped into the entrance. These are not failures. They are information. You deal with them one by one, brush away frost, adjust a covering. The shelter responds immediately. Warmth stabilizes again. You step outside briefly and feel how the world has rearranged itself. Snow lies in new shapes. Familiar paths are softened or erased. Drifts stand where none existed before. This is why adaptability matters more than strength. Winter redraws the map whenever it chooses. You learn to read it again each morning. Movement feels heavier now, snow resists. You slow your pace and let your body find a new rhythm. Efficiency changes after storms. Yesterday's path may no longer serve. You choose a route based on what the snow allows today, not what it allowed before. This flexibility keeps you from exhausting yourself too early. You notice how tools are used differently after nights like this. Snowshoes come out sooner, loads are kept lighter, tasks are prioritized carefully. Not everything needs to be done at once. Winter teaches triage, firewood first, shelter maintenance second, everything else waits. Inside the group moves quietly. No one rushes. Recovery matters as much as response. Bodies that stayed tense too long need gentler movement now. You stretch slowly, feeling stiffness ease without forcing it. Cold leaves its mark even when managed well. Ignoring that invites injury. You share warm food, simple and sustaining. Nothing elaborate. The body needs fuel to recover from stress. Warmth returns gradually. Conversation remains low. Everyone seems to understand that today is not for unnecessary effort. Winter allows productivity, but only on its terms. You think about how survival here depends less on dominating the environment and more on responding accurately. When cold intensifies, you tighten systems. When it eases, you loosen them. This rhythm repeats. It is not dramatic, it is effective. There are places beyond this shelter where people approach winter differently, trying to force comfort through constant exertion. You sense why that approach fails. Effort without adjustment drains reserves. Adjustment without panic preserves them. You check on others quietly. Faces look tired but calm, no signs of distress, no lingering cold. This tells you the night was handled well. Confidence builds not from bravado, but from quiet success repeated many times. Outside the land waits. It does not reward or punish, it simply exists. You match its pace. You shovel where needed. You leave snow where it helps. You make no grand gestures. Winter does not require them. As the day settles into its new shape, you realize that survival here is not about enduring the coldest moment. It is about what comes after. The ability to continue without collapse, to adapt without resentment, to recover without rushing. You return inside and rest again briefly, letting warmth settle deeper. There is no shame in resting after effort. Winter respects those who conserve energy as much as those who spend it wisely. You feel a quiet satisfaction spread through you. The storm has passed, knowledge held, systems adjusted. No one was lost. That is enough. As the light strengthens slowly, you prepare for what comes next, not with tension, but with readiness. Winter will continue to test. You will continue to respond. This balance defines survival more than any single skill. Another night will come. Another challenge will arrive. But for now, there is calm, and calm is precious. You hold on to it, knowing that adaptation, not dominance, is what carries people through the longest winters. When unfamiliar people first arrive in winter, you notice the confusion before you notice anything else. It shows in how they stand too long in open wind, how they build fires too large, how they trust walls more than land. Cold reveals misunderstanding quickly. It does not wait for explanation. You watch them struggle with nights that feel ordinary to you. They complain of drafts where you feel none. They pile fuel onto flames and still wait cold. Their shelters look solid but behave poorly. Heat escapes upward. Moisture gathers where it should not. They mistake enclosure for protection and wonder why winter still finds them. These misunderstandings are not about intelligence. They are about assumption carried from elsewhere. People arrive expecting winter to behave the same way it did in places they left behind. Here, winter follows different rules. The land teaches those rules slowly, but the cold enforces them immediately. You notice how outsiders often clear snow away from shelters, completely exposing frozen ground that drains warmth all night. They do this instinctively, believing bare ground is cleaner or safer. You watch them shiver hours later and understand the mistake. Snow was helping them, not threatening them. Fire becomes another source of confusion. Flames roar, high smoke thickens, fuel disappears too fast, or when fires burn out, the cold returns sharper than before. You've learned to keep fire small and steady to let it assist rather than dominate. That difference feels subtle until a long night proves it matters. Clothing tells a similar story. Layers chosen for appearance rather than movement. Tight bindings that restrict circulation. Heavy garments that trap moisture. You see fingers go numb. Toes lose feeling. Cold claims what blood cannot reach. The mistake is quiet at first, then dangerous. Shelter placement reveals perhaps the biggest misunderstanding. New arrivals choose sites based on visibility or convenience, not airflow or ground behaviour. They build on ridges where wind never rests. They ignore subtle dips that collect warmth. They trust straight walls that catch gusts. You feel the cold funnel toward them and know how the night will end. Some of them watch what you do and assume it is unnecessary. Why stay low? Why move camps? Why share space so closely? These choices look primitive to eyes trained elsewhere. Only after nights pass without solid sleep does curiosity replace judgment. You think about how knowledge travels unevenly. Skills learned through generations do not always translate through observation alone. Winter techniques require understanding cause and effect across time. Copying one habit without the system behind it leads to disappointment. Clearing snow like a mistake. Sharing heat without planning leads to discomfort. Fire without restraint leads to waste. You notice a change after the first difficult weeks. Questions begin to appear, not loud ones, quiet ones asked by people tired of waking cold. Why do you place entrances this way? Why do you let snow remain? Why do you eat like this at night? The tone shifts. Winter has done its teaching. Some methods are adopted quickly. Banking snow against walls, adjusting fire size, loosening clothing before sleep. Others take longer. Shared sleeping, seasonal movement. Trust in land over structure. These require changes in mindset, not just technique. You see how misunderstandings persist longest when pride remains intact. Cold does not negotiate with pride. Those who adapt survive more comfortably. Those who resist learn slowly or suffer quietly. Winter makes no commentary. It simply continues. There are moments when adaptation happens imperfectly. Snow walls built too thick collapse inward. Fires dampened too much go out. Shared sleeping feels unfamiliar and awkward. These missteps are a part of learning. You do not judge them. You remember making similar mistakes once long ago, guided by elders who corrected gently. Some practices are dismissed outright. Moving camps feels like surrender. Using animal fat as fuel feels strange. Trusting landforms feels unreliable. You know these reactions come from unfamiliarity rather than malice. Winter will address them eventually. You notice how language changes too. Cold becomes an enemy in their speech. A force to be beaten. In your world, cold is a condition to be lived with. This difference shapes decisions. Fighting winter exhausts people. Working with it preserves strength. Over time, some outsiders begin to sleep better. Their fires last longer. Their shelters feel quieter. Their movements slow. Winter stops feeling personal. It becomes predictable. You recognize this shift as understanding taking root. Others never adjust fully. They endure winter rather than learning it. Their nights remain tense, their bodies stay stiff. They count days until thaw rather than settling into rhythm. You sense how much energy that waiting consumes. You reflect on how misunderstanding often comes from ignoring small things. How snow sounds when stepped on. How wind shifts near dawn. How breath behaves inside shelter. These details do not announce themselves, they require attention. Winter rewards those who notice. You remember elders explaining that winter is not something to outlast. It is something to join for a time. Outsiders struggle with this idea. Joining feels like giving up control. In reality, it grants it. As seasons pass, some knowledge transfers. Snowshoes appear where they once were mocked. Smaller fires become common. Shelter shapes change subtly. These adaptations spread not through instruction but through relief. Comfort convinces faster than argument. You feel no need to claim credit. Survival is not about ownership of ideas. It is about what works. Winter does not care where knowledge came from. It only cares whether it is used. When spring finally arrives, some will leave believing they endured winter through grit alone. Others will leave changed carrying habits they did not expect to learn. You recognize the difference immediately. You lie down again as night approaches, aware that misunderstanding has its own coldness. It isolates. It wastes energy. Understanding, once found, feels warming in its own way. Winter remains the same. People change. Those who listen adapt. Those who insist struggle. The land remains patient through it all, teaching the same lessons every year to anyone willing to stay long enough to learn. As winter continues, you begin to notice how knowledge moves quietly between people even when words fail. Techniques pass from hand to hand from one night to the next without formal teaching. Someone watches how you bank snow along a wall and tries it themselves the following evening. Someone adjusts the angle of a doorway after feeling where the wind bites hardest. These moments feel small, but they change everything. You remember a time when certain habits were dismissed as unnecessary, sharing space too closely, letting fires burn low, choosing shelter sites that seemed inconvenient. Over weeks of cold nights, resistance softens. Comfort speaks more clearly than explanation. When someone sleeps better for the first time in days, they pay attention to what made the difference. Food practices spread the same way. Fat added back into meals that had grown lean. Eating earlier in the evening rather than right before sleep. Saving certain foods for nights when cold deepens. These adjustments do not require persuasion. They require experience. Winter teaches faster than instruction ever could. You see how borrowed knowledge is reshaped rather than copied. A snow wall built thicker in one place collapses. Next time it is built lower. A fire banked too heavily smothers itself. The following night fuel is added more carefully. Adaptation refines ideas as they travel. No one expects perfection the first time. Some people struggle with the idea of shared warmth at first. The closeness feels unfamiliar. Sleep feels exposed. Over time, this discomfort fades. Bodies adjust. Breathing synchronizes. Warmth becomes undeniable. What once felt strange begins to feel sensible. Winter has a way of normalizing what works. Shelter designs change subtly as well. Straight walls give way to curves, entrances shift position. Materials are layered differently. These changes happen gradually without announcement. One morning you notice that a shelter built by someone else behaves more like your own. Drafts lessen, sound softens, the night passes more easily. Movement patterns adjust too. People stop wandering aimlessly, paths become established. Snow is left where it helps and cleared only where it hinders. Energy is conserved rather than spent, proving resilience. These shifts reflect understanding settling in. You think about how this kind of learning contrasts with formal instruction. No lists, no manuals, only consequences felt directly. Winter removes ambiguity. If something works, you feel it immediately. If it fails, the cold reminds you without delay. There are still variations. Not everyone adapts in the same way. Some hold on to habits longer, others change quickly. The process is uneven, but it moves forward. Shared nights accelerate it. Everyone wakes to the same cold. You notice that questions grow more specific. Not why do you do this, but how much snow is enough? How close is too close? How low should the fire burn? These questions signal a shift from skepticism to curiosity. Winter has already convinced them that something matters. Now they want to understand it better. You answer when asked, but you do not lecture. Too many words confuse. Demonstration works better. You adjust a layer. You move a bundle. You sit where warmth gathers. Observation fills the gaps words leave behind. Children pick up these changes fastest. They do not carry assumptions about how winter should be. They mimic what brings comfort. They remember it easily. Elders recognize this and allow learning to happen without correction unless necessary. Winter education happens best when it feels natural. You reflect on how borrowed knowledge rarely travels intact. It is filtered through place and habit. What survives is what fits. The rest falls away. This keeps systems flexible. Winter punishes rigidity more than ignorance. You see how relief transforms behavior. Once people stop waking, cold tension drops. Movement slow, breathing steadies. Conversation soften. The shelter feels calmer. Cold loses its grip, not because it weakened, but because people stopped fighting it incorrectly. There is no moment when adaptation feels complete. Winter continues to change, conditions shift. Knowledge must remain active. What worked last week may need adjustment tomorrow. This ongoing attention keeps complacency at bay. You notice how gratitude replaces frustration over time. Snow becomes useful, darkness becomes predictable, cold becomes manageable. This shift is subtle, but it affects everything. People who feel grateful conserve energy better than those who feel angry. You lie down again aware that winter knowledge is not owned by anyone. It is shared by necessity. Nights like this pass information forward without ceremony. Comfort spreads quietly, understanding follows. When morning comes, you will see more signs of adaptation. Fires burning lower, shelters holding better, people moving with less urgency. Winter will continue to press, but the response will feel smoother. As sleep arrives, you feel content, knowing that knowledge has moved again, not through argument, but through warmth gained and cold avoided. That is how winter wisdom travels. It settles into bodies first and only later into words. Change arrives quietly at first. You feel it not as cold, but as disruption. Familiar paths are no longer taken. Shelters sit in places that do not quite fit the land. Winter routines feel rushed, interrupted, unfinished. Something has shifted and your body senses it before your thoughts catch up. Movement now happens for reasons other than season. Camps that once followed wind, water and game are asked to stay still or move suddenly without warning. Winter does not adjust to these new patterns. It continues as it always has. The knowledge that once fit perfectly begins to fray at the edges. You notice how timing breaks down. Food stored for one place must now serve in another. Shelter materials suited to familiar ground struggle in unfamiliar soil. Snow behaves differently here. Wind cuts at new angles. Nights feel sharper because systems no longer align with the land beneath them. People work harder but feel colder. Fires burn more often yet provide less comfort. Clothing wears out faster because repair cycles are interrupted. The balance that once made winter manageable grows fragile. Not because the cold is worse, but because the rhythm that answered it has been disturbed. You see how elders feel this most strongly. Their knowledge still works, but only when conditions allow it to be used. When movement is restricted or forced too quickly, the careful sequencing of winter life collapses. Advice arrives too late. Warnings go unheard. The land is no longer being consulted. Children learn differently now. Observation becomes harder when routines are unstored. Winter lessons, once learned slowly through repetition, are replaced by improvisation. Improvisation keeps people alive in moments, but it cannot replace systems built over generations. Shelters become heavier, more permanent, less responsive. They resist change rather than adapting to it. When storms arrive, these structures strain instead of flexing. Snow piles where it was never meant to. Wind finds weaknesses that would once have been avoided entirely. Food suffers too. Storage patterns break. Familiar preservation methods fail under new constraints. Diets narrow. Warmth from within becomes harder to maintain. Nights stretch longer when nourishment no longer matches the season's demands. You feel how winter grows harsher when knowledge is cut off from practice. The cold itself has not been changed. What has changed is the ability to answer it properly. Winter does not forgive delays, does not adapt to rules that ignore land and weather. People still share warmth. They still care for one another. Those instincts remain. But without the freedom to adjust movement, shelter and timing, care becomes reactive instead of preventative. Effort increases. results diminish. You notice how anxiety rises. Not panic, but a constant tension. Waiting replaces preparation. Decisions are made late rather than early. Cold thrives in this space. It slips through gaps left by hesitation. Some knowledge persists stubbornly, snow still insulates. Fire still needs restraint, bodies still benefit from closeness. These truths remain reliable. Others fade when they cannot be practiced fully. Seasonal movement, flexible shelter placement, early response to changing weather, these are harder to maintain under pressure. You feel the weight of adaptation becoming heavier than adaptation should ever be. Winter survival was once about listening and responding. Now it becomes about enduring mismatches. This drains strength slowly. Yet even here, knowledge does not vanish entirely. People remember, they adjust where they can, small habits survive, banking snow, sharing fat, sleeping together. These fragments keep winter from becoming unbearable. You sense how resilience shifts form. It becomes less about thriving and more about holding on. Nights are survived rather than shaped. This difference matters deeply, even if it is hard to name. You lie down aware that winter has always been unforgiving, but it was once predictable. Disruption makes it feel sharper, not because the cold changed, but because the answers are harder to use. As sleep comes, it carries a different texture, lighter, more alert. You remain ready to respond rather than rest fully. This vigilance costs energy, but it feels necessary now. Still, you hold on to what remains: shared warmth, quiet care, attention to small details. These continue to work even when larger systems falter. Winter allows no complete failure as long as some knowledge survives. Morning will come again, it always does. When it does, you will adjust once more using what still fits and letting go of what no longer does. Winter continues. So do you. Time leaves marks even when people are forced to move quickly. You sense this as you sit quietly and let your eyes wander over the ground beneath the shelter. Scratches in packed earth. Worn edges where bedding has been shifted countless times, a place near the fire where heat has darkened the soil more deeply than elsewhere. These traces remain long after voices fade and fires go cold. Long after winter camps are abandoned, these small signs persist. The ground remembers patterns of warmth and movement. People once rested here. They slept here. They survived nights that demanded careful attention. You feel a connection to those moments now, not through stories but through absence shaped by use. You imagine someone in the future uncovering these signs, slowly brushing away layers of earth. They would see where fires burned low and steady, where sleeping spaces clustered rather than spread apart, where entrances were narrowed and reshaped repeatedly. These patterns speak quietly. They do not tell dramatic stories. They tell practical ones. Objects left behind tell similar tales. Broken tools repaired again and again before finally being discarded. Containers showing repeated use rather than replacement. Clothing fragments worn thin in familiar places. These remnants reveal how winter was faced not through abundance but through care and reuse. You recognize that mindset instantly. It feels familiar. Some details resist easy interpretation. Why certain shelters were reinforced more heavily than others. Why some fire pits were used repeatedly while others appear only once. These questions linger without clear answers. Winter does not leave neat explanations. It leaves evidence shaped by countless decisions made under pressure. You think about how archaeologists read these traces today. They look for repetition, for patterns that appear across regions and years. When similar solutions appear again and again, it suggests something reliable at work. Not invention for its own sake, but adaptation refined through necessity. You feel proud of that quiet ingenuity. A small, easily overlooked sign carries weight. The absence of certain things. There are few signs of large fires and winter layers, few indications of waste. This absence speaks of restraint, of nights spent conserving rather than consuming. You understand how deliberate that restraint must have been. You notice how winter layers tend to compress time. Everything's closer together. Sleeping areas cluster. Fire use intensifies in small zones. Activity condenses. Winter life pulls inward. This inward pull leaves a dense record compared to the sprawling traces of summer movement. Some interpretations differ about whether these patterns reflect preference or pressure. Did people choose closeness, or were they forced into it by cold? The ground does not answer directly. It only shows what happened. You sense that the truth includes both. Choice shaped by necessity. You think about how knowledge survives even when people are displaced or disrupted. Small habits leave marks, where someone banks snow repeatedly, where a doorway was angled just so, where bedding was placed again and again. These actions embed understanding into place itself. Even when winter camps were temporary, their impact lingered. Soil compacts differently where bodies rested. Ash changes chemistry. Plant growth responds subtly in following seasons. The land carries memory forward even when people cannot. You feel a strange comfort in this, knowing that care leaves traces, that survival writes itself quietly into the world. Winter does not erase everything. It preserves certain things remarkably well. There are gaps, of course, entire stories that never reach the surface. Winters endured without leaving anything recognizable behind. Nights survive through improvisation rather than established patterns. These moments vanish. Not all knowledge becomes visible later. Some remains held only in bodies and breath. You accept that limitation easily. Winter has always been selective about what it keeps. What lasts is not drama, but consistent. The same careful behaviors repeated until they become indistinguishable from the ground itself. As you lie back and let your eyes close again, you imagine future hands discovering these quiet records. They will see evidence of warmth held carefully, of cold answered thoughtfully, of people who learn to live with winter rather than resist it. That thought steadies you. Even when systems break, even when movement is forced, traces remain. Knowledge leaves marks, care leaves structure. Winter, for all its severity, becomes a kind of archive. Sleep returns gently, carrying this awareness with it. The night feels layered, now thick with past presence. You rest knowing that survival does not vanish when it ends. It settles into the earth waiting to be noticed. As another night approaches, you become aware of questions that never fully settle even after many winters. Not questions that demand answers right now, but ones that linger quietly the way cold lingers in shaded ground long after sunrise. You feel them as pauses in memory, gaps where stories thin out, places where experience explains most things but not all. You think about how much of winter survival was shaped by environment and how much by culture. Some practices appear wherever cold deepens. Shared warmth, low fires, careful movement. Others vary sharply from place to place. Shelter shapes differ. Food priorities shift. Sleep patterns bend differently. The reasons are not always clear. Sometimes two groups living in similar conditions choose different solutions and both work. You sense how knowledge does not move in straight lines. It branches. It doubles back. It disappears for a time and reappears changed. Winter encourages experimentation, but it also punishes error. This tension leaves behind partial answers rather than complete systems. There are moments you remember being told about winters that behave strangely. Snow arriving late, ice forming where it never had before, cold lingering beyond its usual season. In those years, familiar routines struggled. People adjusted, but not always easily. These exceptions complicate neat explanations. They remind you that winter itself changes, even if slowly. You notice how oral traditions sometimes contradict one another. One story emphasizes movement. Another emphasizes staying put. One praises heavy shelter. Another warns against it. These contradictions are not mistakes. They reflect different winters, different landscapes, different pressures. Knowledge adapts to context. Without that context, it can sound inconsistent. You think about how difficult it is to separate choice from necessity when looking back. Did people cluster sushva because they preferred closeness? or because cold left no alternative? Did they eat certain foods because they valued them, or because nothing else endured? These questions resist simple answers. You feel comfortable letting them remain open. Some winter habits appear briefly in memory and then vanish. A certain way of banking snow, a particular fire arrangement, a shelter shape used only once or twice. Were these experiments that failed, or responses to conditions that never returned? Winter leaves no explanation when it moves on. You reflect on how much of winter survival lives outside language, in posture, in timing, in when someone decides not to act. These things are almost impossible to reconstruct later. They exist only in the moment. Once the moment passes, they leave little trace. You realize that even living through winter does not grant full understanding. You survive nights, but you do not always know why one choice mattered more than another. Some knowledge remains embodied rather than articulated. It works without explanation. There are debates you overheard long ago around fire use. How much was too much? How low was safe? Different answers emerged in different places. None were universal. What mattered was responsiveness. Fire was adjusted constantly. Fixed rules failed quickly. The same uncertainty appears around sleep. How long people rested, how often they woke, whether segmented sleep was intentional or simply a response to cold and darkness. You feel the ambiguity in your own experience. Sleep adapts night by night. Patterns emerge, then shift again. You notice how winter knowledge resists standardization. Attempts to systematize it flatten important differences. What works one year fails the next. What works in one valley fails a short distance away. Winter refuses to be simplified. This does not trouble you. It reassures you. Complexity means resilience. If there were only one way to survive, failure would come easily. Instead, there are many overlapping strategies, each compensating for the weaknesses of others. You think about how modern questions often seek definitive answers. Winter offers conditional ones, if this then that, if not adjust. This conditional thinking keeps people alive. It also frustrates those who want certainty. As you settle into rest again, you accept that some questions remain unanswered. Not because knowledge is missing, but because winter itself is not fixed. It shifts, it tests, it refuses to repeat itself exactly. Knowledge follows suit. You breathe slowly, letting the question rest where they belong. They do not need resolution tonight. Survival does not require full understanding. It requires attention, memory, and willingness to adjust. The shelter holds, the fire rests, bodies settle into warmth again. Outside cold continues its quiet work, indifferent to explanation. Inside you remain comfortable with what is known and what remains open. Sleep arrives carrying both certainty and mystery. You allow both to exist. Winter has room for them. The final night settles in gently without urgency, as if winter itself is easing its grip just a little. You feel it in the way the cold no longer presses as sharply against the shelter walls, in the way your body responds faster when you shift. Nothing dramatic has changed, and yet something has. You lie still and notice how familiar everything feels now. The sounds, the warmth, the rhythm of breathing around you. What once demanded constant attention has become instinct. You no longer think through each decision. You live them. Winter survival has moved from effort into habit. You remember your first nights when cold felt personal, almost aggressive. Now it feels like a condition you understand. It still carries danger, but not mystery. That difference matters. Fear wastes energy. Familiarity conserves it. You feel steady where you once felt tense. The shelter holds without complaint. Fire rests quietly. Snow outside insulates more than it threatens. Food remains modest but sufficient. Bodies share warmth naturally. Each piece fits into the others without friction. This is what success looks like in winter. Not abundance, not comfort as excess, just enough arranged well. You reflect on how much knowledge is now carried in your body, in how you sit, in how you breathe, in how you respond to sound. None of this required writing or instruction. It came from nights lived attentively, from mistakes corrected gently, from watching what worked and letting go of what did not. Outside, the stars feel less distant than they once did. The sky no longer looms. It simply exists. You're no longer bracing yourself against it. You belong beneath it even in cold. You sense how winter is already beginning to loosen, not because it is finished, but because you are ready for whatever it brings next. That readiness carries warmth of its own. It allows rest to deepen without vigilance. As you close your eyes, you realize that surviving the coldest nights was never about defeating winter. It was about learning how to stay present within it, listening, adjusting, sharing, remembering. Sleep comes easily now, not because the cold is gone, but because it has been understood. Now everything slows. The shelter breathes softly around you, and the world outside feels far away, padded by snow and silence. Your body no longer tracks the cold. It rests within warmth that feels earned, familiar, steady. Muscles loosen without instruction. Breathing deepens on its own. You do not need to think anymore. There is nothing left to prepare for tonight. Everything that mattered has already been done. The fire knows how to rest, the shelter knows how to hold, your body knows how to stay warm. Thoughts drift past like faint clouds and fade before they take shape. Winter no longer feels heavy. It feels quiet, contained, patient. You sense the night stretching on, but it does not trouble you. Time feels wide and gentle. There is no rush toward morning. There is only rest, layered and calm. Your breathing settles into a slow rhythm, each breath smooth and complete. Warmth remains where it should. Cold stays outside, distant and muted. If your mind wanders, it wanders softly. If sleep deepens, you let it. Nothing pulls at you now, nothing demands attention. You're high, you're warm enough, you're exactly where you need to be. The night carries you easily from here. Sweet dream. Dram.